Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At this time, I'd like to call to order the City of Sebastian Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of Thursday, July 30th, 2020. I'd like everybody to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Have roll call, please.
Mr. Roth?
Here.
Mr. Simmons?
Present.
Ms. Cottenberg?
Here.
Mr. Carter?
Present.
Mr. Reyes?
Here.
Mr. Cristino?
Present.
And Mr. Hugan?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to make an announcement that Mr. Alvarez and Mr. Kissabaj are excused from tonight's meeting, and Ms. Cottenberg and Mr. Cristino will be voting in their place. Next item on our agenda is approval of the meeting minutes. We have June 18th and July 16th meeting minutes. Looking for a motion to approve the minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I have a correction I'd like in the meeting minutes from June 18th. It's on page 4. Regarding comments I made, I believe it's possibly misquoted because we're doing the Zoom thing here. It has to do with my comments regarding the county's plans for the density of the project, where they clearly stated that the capacity did not exist, where my words printed in the minutes did not exceed the limit. Being that they mean two entirely different things, I'd like to bring that up for the record. That could be checked. It was at 6:31 and 30 seconds on the video.
Any other corrections? Hearing none, looking for a vote to approve the meeting minutes with the corrections as stated by Mr. Cristino.
Move to approve as corrected.
Second that motion.
Excuse me, Mr. Reyes,
Yes, ma'am?
is this motion just for the June 18th minutes? Are you going to take the minutes separately? I would recommend that you do.
Oh, I guess I'm going to do them separate since there was a change to this one that came up.
Okay.
So the motion I requested after the first motion was to accept June 18th, if I can make that correction. Thank you. And then we'll readdress July 16th meeting minutes. Thank you. So, looking for, we have a second and a motion. Roll call, please.
I approve to, motion to approve the minutes from July 16th, 2020.
I'm sorry, we're still on your June 18th.
Oh.
You made a correction to the meeting minutes, and I have requested a motion
Okay.
for approval for that. Roll call, please.
Mr. Roth?
Yes.
Mr. Reyes?
Yes.
Mr. Simmons?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Hugan?
Yes.
Ms. Cottenberg?
Yes.
And Mr. Cristino?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. I would like to request a motion for the approval of the July 16th meeting minutes. As
So moved.
submitted. So moved. Can we just get a vote by voice here? So we don't have to do roll call again?
I'll second it.
Thank you. All
Who
here in
seconded?
favor say
Ron, aye.
Excuse me.
aye. I'm sorry?
Excuse me, Mr. Reyes. Who seconded?
Mr. Roth?
Can't see my lips move.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those in opposition of it? Looks like the motion passes. Thank you. I'm sorry if it was a little unorganized there. Apologize to everybody and the public. Thank you. Okay. We have no public hearings or quasi judicial. The next order of business is a review of our proposed 2040 comprehensive plan elements. I believe the city's consultant has a PowerPoint presentation. Would you like to elaborate on that, please?
I think you skipped public input.
No. Oh, yes, you're right.
I apologize. Is there any public input right now on our meeting minutes approvals and stuff?
No, this is the general. And Zoom, if you can raise your
General
hand, please.
public input? No?
Oh.
It's almost like in the wrong place, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't need to reiterate what I just went through. Ms. Frazier, please, could you-
Absolutely, I'd be
Thank you.
happy to. So tonight, thank you all again for showing up and reading all of the voluminous information that you have received regarding this evening's elements. With your permission tonight, because we want to make sure that you all have enough time to absorb and to express any changes or concerns or options that we want to go over. With your permission, we're going to ask that we cover the land use element and housing element first and move transportation and mobility third, so that if we have time to go through that, that's great. If we do not, we're going to offer you that option of covering it at next week's meeting. August 6th, you have a regularly scheduled meeting, and in that meeting, you will be covering the annual CIP. And so at that time, we could also cover the transportation mobility. We have Adam Kerr is a Kimley Horn employee down in our West Palm office, and he would be here. He's a transportation engineer that helped prepare that. That is an option for this council, and so that is why, if, with your permission, this evening, we're going to start with land use and housing, and if we have enough time and you all want to keep moving forward, we'll roll right into transportation. Kelly and I certainly can handle that. But if you feel like you're being rushed or there's time crunch, we can switch it to the 6th. Is that all right with this council, or this board? Commission. Who am I in front of?
It is fine with the chair. I'll ask the other commissioners. Any
No problem.
I'll just make a comment. I'd like to go ahead and get finished with these three elements so that we stay on schedule.
Okay.
So he's going to keep us late, if anybody. Thank you, Mr. Carter.
You're quite welcome, sir.
Well, so with that, I'd like to present our consultant, Kelly Klepper, with Kimley Horn and Associates. Kelly and I have been associated since many years. He is a planner du jour out of the Sarasota office. He has been really keeping us on time and timely, and of course, we're working with a team of planners on these elements. And so I'm so happy that he's here this evening to start us off. Kelly, would you mind going with this PowerPoint?
Absolutely, Lisa.
Barb, are we on screen somewhere? Here we go. Okay. So I'm the one who's not in order. Here I am. Okay, so this evening, again, we are going to be covering the land use, housing, transportation, and mobility elements, right? We still have conservation and coastal management and parks, recreation, and open space to go, and that is scheduled for August the 20th, okay? Just this last Monday, we presented in front of the Parks and Recreation Board. They had some great thoughts and guidance, and we will incorporate them, not into what you will see on the 20th, we'll do it all at one time, but some good thoughts that they came up with. Overall, they were very pleased with the report, and I hope you all are too. As you know, the coastal, or the conservation and coastal management element had gone before NRB back in, I think, February, I want to say, prior to COVID hitting. So that has been completely modified, revamped, and you will be seeing all of that at the same time. In fact, next week, when we meet on the 6th, you will get your 2-week in advanced copy of both those elements for your review. Oh, you're already there. Okay. So we're done with that. Third slide. There you go. You're my Vanna.
I am doing a bad job of it, unfortunately.
And I wanted to make sure that the commission and the public are very much aware that we have finally gotten everything loaded onto the comp plan, or onto the website regarding all of the comprehensive elements that are currently under review, along with some of the supplemental information that we've provided to you. So the public is now able to download everything that you have at this time. And we're very, very grateful to MIS for working with us on this project. They are also putting up every so often going to Facebook and putting in, the announcement that you all are meeting and that we're reviewing this and trying to get more public input. And I thank the public for showing up this evening. This is wonderful. I think this is one of our biggest crowds. Yay. So with that, I'm going to let Kelly go forward. He will go through his presentation. Of course, if you have a burning question prior to his ending it, please feel free to interrupt or to ask questions.
I'll ask one question.
Yes.
So the public is seeing the strike-throughs and everything on the documents?
They haven't seen, no, they have, we always include the strike-throughs along with the final completed on the agenda items for the public during that portion. But I don't have the strike-throughs listed or loaded onto the website. Would you like me to do that? Because that wouldn't be a problem.
Well, it made it sound to me like when everything was uploaded, the public can review exactly what we're looking at. I just questioned that.
Oh, okay,
No,
I'm sorry.
I'm not gonna ask you to do that, because we're gonna look at it all right now, and we'll review it. I guess they'll have a chance to look at it later on.
I have, Mr. Reyes, I believe that I will then go ahead and load up all of the strike-through versions.
I think that's how they'll be able to see the comparisons.
I think that's a great idea, and I will take care of that.
And one other question, when you mentioned Parks and Recreation, is that not leisure services now, or
No,
is
they're still
it
still the
considered
Parks and Recreation
under the land
Board.
use elements?
I'm sorry?
Is it still considered Parks and Recreation under these elements, or is it leisure services?
No, it's called Parks, Recreation, and Open Space, and the board is still Parks and Recreation Board.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, but the director is Leisure Services, yes.
Thank you. I won't interrupt anymore,
No,
sir.
that's fine.
Are we ready? Good evening, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Kelly Klepper with Kimley Horn and Associates. Appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight instead of doing the virtual. And that way you can actually see I am wearing socks and shoes as compared to most people if they're at home sitting down. As Lisa said, we are going through 3 elements tonight. We're going to be going through land use, housing, and then transportation mobility. Keeping in mind that everything that we're talking about has been reviewed, analyzed in the context of the Florida Statutes, Chapter 163, the Community Planning Act. In addition to that, based off of some of the information that you've already seen, we've been looking at not only the Florida statutes, but also what's going on not only within the city, but also within the county, as well as the state, and also the regional aspects, so the water management districts, and those aspects are all coming together under this comprehensive plan. And that's why we call it a comprehensive plan, because as you can see, we've got 9 different elements covering a number of different things under specific elements. The one thing I want to make sure and point out is, the elements on their own stand by themselves. But what you'll also see is that there is a lot of interrelationships between the documents and between the elements. Why? Because they also build on each other. So you're going to see cross-references between the land use to the coastal and conservation, and to the housing and to infrastructure, and vice versa. Why? Because they are integrally related as we're moving through this project. So it kind of starts off with, what's the background? What's the reason we did certain things? When we start talking about the comprehensive plan. You know, we started with the livability workshop, and there was a lot of information that came out as part of that meeting. You know, one of the items that came out was, you know, what do you think about the city of Sebastian moving forward? What do you think we need to be? And everybody was basically asked to provide a word or a series of words. And what came out of that was this Wordle, or the word cloud that you see there. And the one thing I'll point out is, you know, the larger the words, the more the words showed up from the community comment. But we heard things like encouraging mixed-use development, accessibility, environmental protection, and predictability. Those are 4 key themes that you're going to see throughout the entirety of the comprehensive plan. So when we start talking about what is the land use element, now, a lot of people start saying, oh, it's that big colored map that you have up on the wall that says where we can build certain things. Well, you got about that much of it at that point. The land use element is actually looking at a lot of different things. It's not only looking at the colors on the map and where you can and cannot start looking at certain types of development or certain types of activities, but you're also looking at the distribution of transportation, of environmental features, of economic centers, of jobs, of education. All of the things that create a community all come into that land use element. So at the end of the day, you know, what we're looking at is not only your current population, but we're also looking at your future population trends, locally and regionally. What is needed to support those populations, and also that economic component as far as jobs creation. One of the things that we'll be talking about tonight is kind of looking at where is the city going and growing in the next 10, 20 years. And that's part of what makes up this land use element. So when you start looking at what is the city right now as we know it, based off of the 2019 estimates from University of Florida's what we call BEBR, the Bureau of Economic and Business Research, they're saying the city's 25,000. Okay, not too bad. We're saying that looking at those trends and kind of those growth projections, that there's an estimated 9,400 additional people that would be coming over the next 20 years. To us as planners, we think that may be a little conservative, but it's a number that that everybody's basically accepted based off of a certain amount of methodology and kind of, I'll say, the factors going into it. Now, we're going to get a good gut check here in the next 6 to 9 months when the census numbers are released and we can actually see what's going on specific to the city and see how good the University of Florida really is with their projections. So we're looking at that because we know, based off of that population growth, based off of the number of people per household, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, that we know we need a certain amount of houses within the community. Houses tie to the residential population, which there again start to tie back to our transportation networks, our infrastructure, our schools, our parks and open space, and a lot of things that you'll hear us talk about referring to the level of service. So we're looking at those projections to make sure that the city is moving in the right direction and able to serve the community as a whole. A couple of things that are integral to the land use element, and a lot of this is also called out in what we call the DIA, that data inventory and analysis. That's kind of the meat and potatoes behind, I'll say, the written words, the policies. And we start talking about future land use versus existing land use. Now, it's just like it sounds, future land use, what do we want to be in a certain property or a certain area in the next 10, 20, up to 2040? Existing land use is a snapshot in time that says, here's what's on the ground today. And you maybe start saying, well, how do you know what's on the ground today? We have to rely on the property appraiser's office, the county, as well as the state Department of Revenue. So that when they go out and actually are assessing properties, they're looking at what's on the ground, the number of square feet, the type of business, the type of house, the year constructed. So basically when you see your tax notice, that's the information that's getting translated, and that's what we start looking at a specific point in time. Now, when we did this analysis there, again, it was on the front end of some of this, so there may be some fluctuations that have changed over the last 6 months. But I will say the data is basically it's based off of 2019 information collected by the county as well as the state. So and why is this important? Because it's letting us know how much land you have left within the current city of Sebastian. So when we start looking at the revenue codes, we start identifying based off of their definitions what's residential, what's commercial, what's industrial, all the way through, including what's vacant. And you may go, well, 1,200 acres of vacant, there may be something that's actually on that property, but it's, yeah, whatever. It may not be exactly what's what. What I will say is that the property appraiser is looking at pieces of property that are truly vacant or underdeveloped, or developed with something that's not consistent with your current codes. And that's where the vacant land use comes from. From that, we start looking at comparing that with your current comprehensive plan. Why do we start looking at the comprehensive plan? Your current future land use map? We've got to have that baseline to move forward from. So we're looking at the existing land use. We're looking at your currently adopted future land use map, which Lisa also has up on the boards here. And that gives us that framework to say, here's the starting point, here's where we want to take it to. Now, this next item is very critical in this analysis because, you know, we talked about that population growth, that there's over 9,000 people coming in the next 20 years, and the number of houses and the amount of commercial. So we start looking at what's on the ground today and then start looking at what's vacant. What can we accommodate? What we do is called a build-out analysis or a carrying capacity. What can we physically sustain on the property today based off of this land use? So we do that analysis to say, okay, based off of everything that we know right now, if nothing changes, you can accommodate this many more residential uses or this amount of commercial or industrial moving forward. That helps with a lot of our kind of visioning moving forward to say, okay, we're a little too light in residential or we're too heavy in commercial or vice versa, so that we can start making those changes at the policy level. Because as you know, the comprehensive plan is that overarching umbrella that everything else kind of falls within. Your comprehensive plan sets the policy, your land development code sets the actual implementation.
And if I may, Kelly, the nugget that I think the connection that needs to be made is that the state sets the standards based on how much commercial you need, how much residential you need based on the population, just so you know that. It's not, you know, Kelly and I sitting here coming up with some numbers. This is a state standard that they set based on a population. If you have so much residential population or so much of a population, do you have enough houses based on, what's the number, something per thousand? I think it's four, I know, I think it's 4 per thousand, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. You would think I would have it. Oh, it's 2.24 people per dwelling unit, that's it. And then you can expect to absorb 10,541 additional people. So then do you have enough houses for those people? And then do you have enough commercial that serves those people? I mean, these are state standards that then you have to go look to see what's your land use and do you have enough of that land use category to serve that population. Do you understand how that all flows down the little pike, I think? Yes? Hopefully I didn't confuse you more, sorry.
One quick question. I'm not sure if his microphone is on. I'm having a little trouble hearing you. I can hear you clearly. In everything I've reviewed here, I'm showing a figure of 2.42 on housing, not 2.24. So I'm not sure what the conflicting information is due to. But I've reviewed this extensively, and I see 2.42 as the number we're supposed to be using.
Yeah, we will go back and confirm, make sure there's not a number that has been flipped. I know looking at the build-out analysis back in the DIA, we were looking at the 2.24 as well, but yeah, we will definitely go back and confirm that.
I believe the rental figure was 3.07, if I'm correct.
I'm sorry? On
the rentals, the population per household DU was 3.07. Do you have that number, or? I have it.
We look at an overall average. It doesn't matter if it's home ownership versus rental. So we're looking at an overall average of persons per household, period. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's try this one. Let's let him continue with his presentation instead of asking questions now while he's doing his presentation. I know Ms. Frazier interrupted you there, but if we can keep going with your presentation. I'm
Sure.
sure all the commissioners will have some questions afterwards.
Absolutely. And I will say that Lisa and I have worked together enough to where she'll finish a lot of my thoughts.
I see that.
And we, like I said, it works out well this way because kind of like the old married couple, she'll finish my sentences because I can't remember what I'm supposed to be saying half the time. But with that, and there again, what we're talking about is the data. And you may go, okay, Mr. Klepper, great, get to the policies, get to the discussion, get to the items that really mean something. Well, a lot of this is based off of what, the policies we're going to be getting to are based off of this information. One of the things I wanted to point out is that a number of years ago, the state actually kind of did a flip-flop on the way they did growth management. If you recall the old days of what we called DCA, the Department of Community Affairs, it was very draconian, and it was also to the point that they said you can only allocate enough residential to meet your maximum population. You can't go above, which, that in itself is a restriction or limitation on growth, which of course it's what they were doing was growth management, but it also started to drive up prices. It started to drive a lot of things that were kind of directly impacting your community. Well, what changed over the last couple of years was the state said, instead of looking at what's that maximum cap, we want to make sure that you're providing that at least for that minimum amount of population coming in. You have to accommodate those population numbers. So when you start looking at our population estimates, there again, we've got to make sure we're accommodating at least 9,400 people. Based off of what we currently have, you're being able to accommodate over 10,000. Now that is a conservative number. We know that is actually a little bit higher, but based off of the formulas and the way that we have to approach the analysis, that's where that kind of lays out. Now, we're also not just looking at what's going on in the city. Why? Because you have the county right up against you. And, in certain areas of the country, the county is the county, and it's the old rural components that we all knew and loved. That was, the city was the urbanized center, the county was the rural, and that was what it was. Well, what's changed over the course of time, and of course across the state of Florida, is the counties are as dense, if not denser, than some of our urban centers. And to kind of talk a little bit about that, what we did is we started looking at what's going on immediately adjacent to the city limits. And what we found out was the county actually has land use provisions that allow upwards of 8 dwelling units per acre right up against your area, which may have only 4 to 5 dwelling units per acre. Now, one of the challenges that we always see about this is, you're not seeing the benefit of that additional development or growth or whatever you want to say at that point because, you're not realizing the revenues because you're not getting property taxes, you're not getting the business licenses, you're not getting that foot traffic. That's all in the county. You don't have control over those land uses because it's in the county, it's not in the city. But what you are seeing is the increased impacts on your infrastructure, your water, your wastewater, or your transportation, especially your stormwater. So we need to make sure that we're actually talking with the county so that, our plan and their plan are trying to marry up. And you'll see some policies in here as we're moving forward with annexation, talking about low impact development so that we're starting to accommodate and plan for that future expansion as it comes about. Now, a lot of times this is where people say, well, you're going to start talking about density. What is density? Density is a very simple equation. It's the number of houses per acre. So what we did is kind of give you an idea. Some people go, well, tell me what that looks like or show me what that looks like. So, in the graphic there's up on the screen, we've got some additional graphics in just a second. You can see that lower left, 1 house per acre. That is a very much rural standard. That's what you'll see typically further out west in the county, especially as you get closer to the turnpike. 6 units per acre, 6 houses per acre, that's very much urbanized. And of course, when you start seeing things like 35, 50, or 75, that's downtown Tampa, downtown Orlando, and some of those more urbanized areas. Now, the scary thing is I do a lot of reviews for the Florida Department of Transportation in what we call District 6, and that's Miami-Dade County and Broward. We're actually seeing densities that are upwards of 300 to 500 per acre, which is kind of scary when you start thinking about from an analysis standpoint. We're definitely not talking about those densities anywhere except, we'll say, the 1 and the 6 for the city of Sebastian. What does that look like on the ground? So a very low density residential, upwards of about 4, the city's right at 3. This is typically what you will see. And this is, similar to what you see coming in off of Delaware and those areas closer to the airport. So that's literally 4 houses per acre. that is still considered to be low density or very low density by a community standard. When you start talking about some other density upwards of 6, the city is about 5 on theirs, and Sebastian Highlands, you start seeing the townhouses, you start seeing those attached components of houses, maybe not necessarily a detached 1 house per family, but more, we'll say 3 houses or 3 units per building. And then you kind of start working your way up. This is an example of 8 to 9 dwelling units per acre. And then we get into, of course, what we call intensity. So you're going to hear us talk about density and intensity throughout tonight. Density is a residential standard. Intensity is a non-residential standard. Intensity is basically looking at the amount of square footage of a business or a building on that particular piece of property. And to kind of give you an example, we all know 1 acre is 43,560 square feet. If you have a floor area ratio of 1, and it's on a 1 acre piece of property, that is a building that is 43,560 square feet. It could be 1 story, it could be 2 stories. Doesn't matter. That's what we're talking about when we're saying floor area ratio. And this kind of gives you a quick example of when we're talking about floor area ratios of 0.5 versus a 1, what does that actually look like when we're starting to develop?
And I'm going to interrupt Kelly again just to make the point that, and it is in the element, it is written that these densities and intensities are not given by right, if you will. So that if you have a piece of property that's supposed to be 5 units per acre, and you demand 5 units per acre, you don't get 5 units per acre necessarily, because there are other parameters in the building, in the land development code, that might, what am I trying to say, reduce the amount of intensity or density that you can have on that lot. Things like buffers, setbacks, height limits, the minimum size of a residential home, your stormwater requirements, your landscape requirements. So again, even though you may, on the land use side, you get 5 units per acre, you may end up with 3.5 units per acre at the end of the day once you put in all of those other parameters. I just want everyone to understand that. So when in the land use element, it'll say this is not by right. You don't get these densities or intensities by right, and that's what that means, that there's other considerations on your property that have to be taken into account. Does that, again, I'm the person just trying to make the connection, and if I'm confusing you more, I'll just sit back.
Well, that's very helpful.
Thank you.
So you may be asking, say, okay, Mr. Klepper, why did you go through all of that? Well, we needed to give you kind of the background as we're starting to talk about some of these densities, some of these intensities, some of these policies as it relates to land use and annexation, and kind of give you that background of where were we when we first started this process and what were we looking at and why, so that as we're looking at the brand new future land use map and the policies that we have under the land use element, they'll start to make more sense. And you'll start to see, okay, that's why we're talking about this density, or this is why we're talking about transfer of development rights and what all of that means. So instead of going through every single policy or goal objective policy that has changed, we wanted to kind of give you a quick snapshot of what are the key policy changes that have been either added, modified, or as part of this element. This is just a very quick listing of those, and we're going to go through each of these in very brief detail, but just to let you know, this isn't the whole thing. We went through the entire element. We created a matrix that says every policy that the city has in its current comprehensive plan, we either said retain, remove, amend, move, or do something else with at that point. And where there are new policies like these or major modifications, we wanted to call those out for your information. One of the things I'm going to kind of key on, and especially as we're talking about mixed-use designations and some of these low-impact developments and design components, what we're talking about are increasing in options. A lot of comprehensive plans and a lot of codes that are adopted today are very matter-of-fact, by the book, straight-laced, here it is, one size fits all. And what we've realized over the course of the planning history is one size does not fit all. And we've proven that time and time again, especially when you start thinking about restaurants. Restaurant usage, parking, or even the trips generated are not the same. I'll give you a great example. McDonald's versus a Chick-fil-A. They don't park the same. They don't have the same amount of traffic or trips. So why do we always treat them the same, especially from a land use or a code perspective? So what we're trying to do is create some additional options so that Lisa and this group actually has a little bit more flexibility in what they're doing and why. We're also trying to capture some smart growth, and I know a lot of people say as soon as they hear the word smart growth, that means it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But smart growth principles. We're looking at compact urban forms. We're looking at those connections between properties and projects. We're talking about walkability. We're talking about low impact development where we're utilizing infrastructure more efficiently. All of that comes back at a price, and when I say a price, a return on investment to the city of reducing costs. That's a key, especially when in these fiscal times. The more that we are having as a community have to pay to service a water, a sewer line, a road, a transit stop, that's dollars that come out of parks and recreation or community services. By doing a lot of these things as either mixed use or the smart growth components, we can minimize those costs or aggregate those costs in one area instead of spreading them all across the area. So from this aspect, we added a brand new mixed use designation. Why? You have one in place right now. It's very limited, and it's actually locationally restricted. So what we said was, why is it only this one area that only gets to use mixed use? Why not allow it to be located in other areas where there is a potential for commercial, residential, or office components, along transit, along areas where we have the infrastructure to support mix of uses? And we're seeing more and more of that these days, so why not encourage and embrace that? Let's encourage it. Another aspect of this is, and you're going to hear me talk about TDRs, transfer of development rights. And what we're trying to do at that point, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in just a minute, is to actually minimize the cities and the property owners' losses or impacts from sea level rise, from flooding, or whatever those areas are that we're trying to preserve and protect as a city, by allowing those individuals to either move the development rights from one portion of their property to another, or under certain limited circumstances, as you all see fit to and identify in your land development code, move it from one property to another property. And we'll talk about why we're proposing those components in just a moment, especially as it relates to what we call our coastal high hazard area. We wanted to make sure you understood what we were talking about here with the proposed densities and intensities, because that's kind of the backbone that goes along with the map. One of the things that we wanted to identify and make sure everybody understood was, we were holding the densities where they are. There was some discussion early on about, do we do certain things, do we look at increases or differences? And kind of where the recommendation fell out was, your densities aren't bad for what you have. Let's look at a couple of things. More importantly, let's look at a new designation to increase that flexibility. The fact that you only have about 15% vacant land starts to call into question, do we want to start increasing densities, which could potentially cause incompatibilities within existing neighborhoods? So the idea was not to do that at this point. So what does our 2040 future land use map look like? And believe it or not, very similar to what you have right now, with a few exceptions. And we've identified those in the analysis, but I think, Lisa, there's like 3 or 4 main properties that have been recommended for a different land use designation than what they currently have. And I'm going to defer to Lisa on this one as far as notification.
Right, so there's 2, I think we only did 2,
Okay.
changes. The triangle, where the split is for 512, the whole triangle there, it is a mix of commercial, industrial, institutional, residential. It's just a big mix. So we designated the entire triangle as mixed use. And also, we might be changing Doc Fisher's property. He is interested in that. What I want to emphasize to this commission is that should we move forward, all of these individual property owners will be notified as to this change and how it either, it's not a down zoning or a reduction in their ability to use the property. So we want to make sure that they know that, but if they have any contention with it, then of course it won't go forward. But we will make sure that all of the property owners are notified should we continue with this thought process. That's all that Kelly really wanted me to make sure that you all knew. Do you want me to, okay.
Yeah, Lisa, do you want to talk about industrial?
I do. So you may or may not be aware that recently the city council asked staff to get to yes in a particular change of use. The motion that's in front of you was from our recent city council meeting. It is not the approved motion language, but it is what's in the minutes at this point. They're not the approved minutes, but I just wanted to make sure that you all had a chance to look at them and see what we believe the council was asking us to do. There are, in the existing industrial comprehensive plan, we have language that prohibits salvage yards. And the definition of salvage yards is, where automobiles or marine even boats are left to be salvaged, right? To be pulled apart and sold either entirety or in parts and pieces for retail. When you think about it, this really is a recycling activity, right? We want to avoid, junkyards are prohibited in the city of Sebastian. So salvage yards, if we allow it in the industrial land uses, correct, then we have policies that we'll have to also write in saying that salvage yards are allowed, and we're proposing that they would be allowed under recycling facilities with conditions. And of course, those conditions would prohibit it from being a junkyard. You all remember the recycling ordinance. So we have been tasked, staff, and we're bringing it to you, the commission, in making this happen. And so I'm trying to delicately dance around this and give you some options. There's the consideration that in the land use change now, we could add a heavy industrial and we have a light industrial now. My concern as your community development director is that we only have 4% of our land in the city designated industrial, and only 52 acres are vacant. So we can allocate one area as heavy. It wouldn't be very much. We could create a heavy industrial land use. However, if you look at the existing language of the comprehensive plan, can you do the next slide, please, Kelly?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. This is the existing language. It says heavy metal fabrication, batch plants, salvage yards, chemical or petroleum manufacturing or refining, rubber or plastics manufacturing, or other use generating potentially harmful environmental or nuisance impacts shall be prohibited. These uses typically generate heavy truck traffic, require significant acreage, are difficult to screen and buffer from residential areas, and therefore should be located in more sparsely developed unincorporated areas. The existing language prohibits heavy industrial uses. So we've modified the language. Next one, if you caught that in the proposed language, to say that heavy metal fabrication, batch plants, chemical or petroleum manufacturing or refining, rubber or plastics manufacturing, or other use generally potentially harmful environmental or nuisance impacts shall be prohibited. So we removed salvage yards. We recommend that we add a policy that states salvage yards will be allowed, next button please, will be allowed within recycling facilities as a conditional use. And the LDCs we shall.
Ms. Fraser.
Yes, sir. Am I confusing you?
I am very uncomfortable with anybody telling me to come to a yes on something that I've already reviewed, this entire board reviewed, and spent a good time on this. Why is this even brought up during this land use? I mean, it's almost to me an item-specific item that's been in the background. I don't think we should be told to get to a yes on this. And I don't really think it should be discussed right now.
Well, I would.
Am I wrong in saying that?
No, you're never wrong in making your statements, Mr. Reyes, truly. I don't want to mislead you.
It's like we're being forced to review what we already reviewed and came to a decision on.
Well, I do hear.
The city council needed to make their decision on it and not put it back on us.
I hear you, but this is the appropriate time to make the changes to the comprehensive plan. And I'm presenting to you, we already did.
Yeah, but don't tell us to come to a yes.
We already did.
Okay.
And I mean, you have in front of you, the change that was made already, correct? And I'm just suggesting that we add policy language that.
To accommodate? Is that what that is?
That we add policy language to make sure that salvage yards are put within recycling facilities.
Okay, we'll pay some good attention to that.
I'm just going to make a brief comment. I'm with Chairman Reyes on this. I've attended the city council meetings where we're trying to accommodate Warrior Salvage over there. I don't believe that enough thought was given into how the gasoline in those vehicles would get recycled, how the oil, the brake fluid, the tires, these things have been prohibited clearly in the comp plans for many years in the city of Sebastian. So for us to get the yes, I think we've got to have some solid answers on whether or not these products are going to end up contaminating groundwater, et cetera. What's the guarantees that there are residents in that area? We're providing buffer zones.
See, we're getting off track here. This was supposed to be a presentation for our land use elements and all the other elements involved in this comprehensive plan. I don't think this should have been added in here, and I like it to continue with the PowerPoint presentation. It's just.
Okay, I apologize, sir. We'll continue.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I could, and I apologize, I can't read your last name, sir. Mr. Cristino?
Cristino.
Thank you. I was noticing when Lisa was doing the discussion about the industrial where Mr. Cristino was looking at the 2.42. We will get back and confirm that before your meeting next week and verify the 242 versus the 224. So my apologies on that. We will definitely have that for you before next Thursday.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
I've
sir.
read that also in other articles concerning the city of Sebastian as population density
Yes, sir.
per dwelling unit.
And thank you for pointing that out to us. So yes, we will. I made a big note, number one. Okay, transfer of development rights, what we affectionately call TDRs. We love to use acronyms in planning, so TDRs, and then we get into what's called an SZ or an RZ. I think we get paid by the acronym a lot of times in these plans, but basically what we're talking about is the ability to move a development right, whether residential or non-residential, either from one piece of property to another outside of a flood zone, outside of the coastal high hazard area, outside of one of your adaptation overlays, to a more suitable location. So basically that the city's not having to purchase property and purchase development rights. It still allows that individual property owner to retain their full development rights on their property, or under certain circumstances maybe look to do something in another area, whether it's the triangle or other areas. That is something that you if you want to pursue, of course, is you identify the policy in your comprehensive plan, and then you identify and adopt specific standards in your land development code. But there again, that is a practice that is very common, especially in Florida. When we start talking about coastal high hazard, the flood potentials that we have, and even on some of our environmental lands, trying to protect corridors. I've actually been working with transfer development rights programs for the better part of 25 years. In Florida as well as other places. And the core of that is just not getting into a taking situation where the city or the government is taking somebody's property rights. You're still allowing them to develop but in a more appropriate manner in areas where it's less susceptible to impacts. So what we're proposing there again is to provide that TDR policy, which will set the stage for further components of your land development code moving forward. So there again, creating that as the guide doesn't say that thou shall at the end of the day or what that policy or that provision looks like, but at least gives you the roadmap and the ability to do that later on. Addition of low impact development and annexation policies. I think this was actually something that came up in a recent discussion, including the large scale annexation that the city had, that the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council was saying, hey, you know, one of the things that you probably should consider with annexations are some form of low impact development or something else. Now, low impact development can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, but basically what we're trying to do is create the mechanism there that, you know, the vision and the high standards that the city has in place now is to continue to utilize those and actually apply those to future development within the city, those, i.e. those annexation lands, so that they're held to the same standard coming in. So as part of your overall approach to annexation, you're also looking at the development potential of that property, and at the same time saying, we understand this is going to develop, we want it to develop in this manner, and here's why. The city has a lot of natural features, a lot of environmental features that are worthy of protection. If not, you wouldn't have the Indian River Lagoon Council, you wouldn't have all the groups that you have in this area looking out for certain environmental features. And you know, that is a natural draw to this area. You know, a community that's actually looking to protect their assets is a community that's growing, it's thriving, and it's sustainable. We're just asking and recommending that you implement certain policies that will help with that water quality, air quality, subsurface qualities. We're talking about lesser impacts on the roadways, on the environment at the end of the day. A smart growth principle. So what we're saying is, you know, start looking at adoption of a policy that will, there again, lead you to a land development code update, talking about, you know, in general, the way the city grows and develops. The way that Florida cities have grown and developed over the last several decades has been very, in a lot of cases, haphazard. It's either been haphazard or it's been very compartmentalized to where it's one size, one use here, one use there, one use there. And that's part of the reason that we have sprawl today. That's part of the reason that, you know, communities are having to extend roads further out. Instead, what we're saying is let's actually look at some of those policies that allow for, and encourage compact development, where there is sufficient infrastructure to accommodate that growth so that we're not having to force it further and further out. We can actually confine it within the areas of the city and make it work efficiently. So we're actually recommending that as a new policy as well. This is something that also kind of came out, I mean, and there was a lot of discussion when we were doing the resiliency master plan and the conservation element last year as far as adding in additional emergency management objectives and policies. You know, being the community that we are here, there's more to this than just floods and hurricanes. You know, unfortunately, we're all sitting around having to wear these or walk around with these and be in a protected bubble. The infrastructure that we have, not only on the water and the wastewater, is at risk, but also you start looking at what is the IT components. Do we have enough Wi-Fi capabilities? Do we have enough network and server capabilities to accommodate certain things? So what we're saying is, you know, start looking at a broader emergency management plan and approach to the city's growth development and its policies. There again, it's all, for the last several times, it's been very narrowly focused. We're saying to expand that out a little bit more broadly. Infill and redevelopment. This can end up being a lot of discussion a lot of times, but especially when you've got older established communities. You've got about 15% of your total land right now that's deemed to be vacant. That's pretty good, but it's not a lot. So what we're saying is let's make sure that we are focusing in on the infill development instead of pushing the boundaries further out. Let's look at the redevelopment capabilities. If you start actually walking around, driving around, and looking at what's on the ground versus what could be developed, what you're going to see is there's a lot of inefficiencies in the way that our land use patterns have been built out over the course of time. You know, we have large amounts of surface parking lots that could very easily be used for buildings or for structures or for other types of uses. So in allowing those types of things to happen, we actually did a study for a community over on the West Coast, very similar to the city of Sebastian, called Largo. And we looked at an area and actually said, what's on the ground right now? And then we started applying their own comprehensive plan policies, much like what we did here. And we said, you know, if you did a focus on infill and redevelopment, you may not actually have to redesignate new property. You could better utilize the property that you have. So you start thinking about 14% vacant. Let's start thinking more about infill and redevelopment, because that's where our infrastructure is. That's where our police, fire, water, wastewater, fire hydrants, transit, all of that is within this urban core. Let's start thinking about where is it most effective and most cost efficient for the city to provide those services, and also from a development perspective. Mr. Chairman, at this point, I will stop and take a break and allow for any questions you may have.
Thank you. All right, commissioners. Mr. Hugan, we'll start with you. You have any questions?
Yeah, I have one thing, and it comes back to the junkyards. That's what I have flagged in my, the thing I have, I don't think we ought to have junkyards or recycling, car recyclings, for the specific reason they're environmental hazards with the gasoline, the diesel fuel, the grease and everything. So that's what I had flagged, and I think it ought to be in there somewhere that we can't have junkyards or recycling plants. So that's all I have.
Mr. Carter.
No questions, no comments.
Mr. Christina, you must have a lot of questions.
None at all. I do. I do. Now, these general questions, because some of these I picked out of, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Getting into, I noticed changes in strike-throughs, specifically protecting the environmentally sensitive lands designated in the comprehensive plan, especially wetlands, and strike-through is which shall be identified based on the presence of hydric soils, included but not limited to, and list the various soils and wetland vegetative species as presented. So I'm wondering why that's on a strike-through and on 33.
I'm sorry, excuse me, Mr. Christino?
Okay, am I ahead of myself, or?
Are you looking at the land use element, sir?
Yeah, I actually am.
And the existing, see, here's what you may be looking at is, and I don't know where wetland.
Well, soils and topography.
Definition was in here?
In other words, are we?
What page is it, Mr. Christina?
What page?
Okay, land use element draft in the back, the strike-through, page 31.
Wow.
You're down about a third, the first third.
I don't have it.
Where it starts with protecting environmentally sensitive lands.
Oh, resource protection. Okay,
So here
yes.
it clearly states, you know, in the old, I'm assuming that's the old comp plan that has the strike-throughs.
That's correct, sir. And
We've
that,
identified soil types that are indicative of wetlands.
correct. And that all was moved to the conservation coastal management portion.
That's correct. I don't see the language rewritten and inserted.
It would be
anywhere in here.
inserted in the conservation and coastal management element, not the land use element.
So that's in a different element.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
Is what you're saying.
You know,
All right,
when,
that was just a concern.
is that
We're still
okay?
going to use those criteria in determining wetland areas.
Well, absolutely, that's a state law.
Okay.
That is the state standard is you look at hydric soils, hydrology, and then hydrophytic
Okay.
plants.
All right, very good. They answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Christina, if I could, you'll actually be seeing that specific element on August the 20th. And what you'll see is there has been a significant enhancement to the city's conservation components from not only what you're talking about with the wetlands and the native habitats, but an expansion for not only those types, but also vegetative communities, herbaceous communities. I mean, there's a lot more protections that we put into the comprehensive plan. And I will say this for just for the entire groups, what we realized is when we were going through the comp plan, this plan had been kind of piecemealed and everything kind of put in hodgepodge. So we wanted to try to put like terms and like policies in the area where people would normally be looking for those. So yeah, you're going to see a lot of things that have moved out of, we'll say, land use or infrastructure that are now under conservation and coastal.
As long as they're somewhere else.
Yes, sir.
I'm fine with that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions, Mr. Christina?
I'm finished right now.
Ms. Koffenberg?
Okay. I just have a couple of things. First of all, with respect to the creation of junkyards, I don't have any problem with having a zoning district called heavy industrial where that would be appropriate. What I have a problem with is that we don't have that land, that type of land in the city now. I think at some time in the future, were we to annex land, we might find appropriate land, but I have a real problem with, and I know the technologies have changed so that handling of the fluids and things can be done safely and professionally. I know that can happen, but I looked over the map here, and I just don't see any place where everything we have is really too close to and would impinge on what I call the rights of others, I guess. So, like I said, I don't have any problem with it. I used to have a friend who owned several gravel pits, and everybody complained about the activity involved with obtaining gravel. And he used to say all the time, you know, everybody wants roads, but nobody wants a gravel pit. And I feel the same way about recycling. Everybody wants to be able to get rid of their junk, but nobody wants to have a recycling place anywhere near them. And so I have those feelings about, yes, we need that service, and yes, we should allow it, but only in appropriate places. And I don't think we currently have appropriate places. That's my bit on that. In looking at the land use element, and these questions, my questions might be out of line, but we have a policy for mobile homes, residential development on page 4. Is it possible to insert maintenance criteria? And the reason I ask that is because mobile homes tend to deteriorate very much the way other vehicles do, and in fact, Florida considers them vehicles, even though the wheels no longer exist or never did. And while we have some really lovely mobile home parks, we have some that have gotten very unlovely over the period of time. And I think that going forward, while there is certainly a place for this kind of development, I think it might require some maintenance criteria.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if it's appropriate to respond directly back on questions.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because some communities don't let you do that. But really good comment. The one thing I would say is those types of standards are typically found either in your land development code or in a companion with the building code, like a property maintenance component.
Okay, so, all right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm clear on that.
No, but that is a great question, though.
Under, on page 5, limited commercial development, again, I'm assuming that we would be addressing whether residence was permitted in limited commercial. It isn't mentioned here, but it should be.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I did not hear what you were asking about with limited commercial.
Yes.
I understood that reverse. I understood that asking about residential and commercial.
It states policy, the policy for limited commercial development on page 5 states that the purpose of limited commercial land use is to consist of sites intended to accommodate neighborhood-level commercial activities. Maximum intensity, limited commercial activities, and personal services shall include establishments catering to the following. But it doesn't indicate that it could also include residential.
Is that because we don't have the triangle piece designated as mixed use right now?
Yeah, I was going to say, what you want to do in this case is not start mixing the apples and oranges. So what we've done is to retain the commercial as commercial, but create a mixed use that would allow for the commercial, the office, and the residential under one designation. I will say that there are, it ends up being some levels of confusion and lack of predictability when you start allowing, I'll say, mixed use outside of a mixed use area. We ran into a couple of cases, and I'll use the city of Venice as a great one, that permitted under commercial, office, residential. And you could do one or all three. So, it became very problematic. So that's one of the reasons where we have defined districts such as the commercial and the industrial, we want to keep those specific and then allow the mixed use in those areas where it can actually be supported and, properly transitioned, buffered, and things like that.
Understood. And I'll get away from the fruit salad right now. Thank you. That's all for me.
Mr. Simmons.
Okay. On the future land use map 1.5, actually it's on page 29, and I think maybe the map that matches it is on page 43, but do these include the existing annexations over the past couple of years?
Yes, sir. It includes the Spirit of Sebastian, if you recall, the enclave by the railroad. And then it includes the, was it last year, the 60-something acres right north of 510? It includes those two annexations in the last couple of years. It does not include the current annexation under discussion right now with the City Council. We did not include that in this future land use.
Okay, thank you.
However, if I may, we did, the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council and the DEO provided some nice technical recommendations regarding the Graves Brothers annexation, 1,000-acre annexation. They provided some nice technical recommendations and for updating our comprehensive plan, and we did weave a lot of those recommendations into our comprehensive plan. So it was nice to get that kind of free advice as to, what we should have in our comprehensive plan looking forward to the future.
And one other question.
Yes, sir.
When you modified it, well, you didn't really modify the number of them, but where you went from, on residential, this is the density, up to, where you scratched out, up to, instead of now it's a specific number. Why? I mean, I'm just asking the question, why was that changed?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking, Mr. Simmons.
On page,
Oh, are we talking
actually
about?
it's on page 5 of the revision, and it was on page 2 of the scratch outs.
Yeah, and similar to what Lisa was talking about earlier, where we say, this is not guaranteed by right, we just felt that up to was redundant based off of the addition of that statement, the last line of the statement in policy 1-1.1.3. That's a mouthful. And, that's dealing with, the maximum intensity is not guaranteed by right, and there's similar statements within the residential, so we just felt that it was redundant.
Okay.
And when you're seeing the up to, it's an 8 units per acre, correct? However, with incentives, the developer may be able to get to 10 units per acre. And some of the incentives are, setting aside the transfer of development rights, setting aside some environmentally sensitive areas and transferring those development rights into the property, doing some additional improvements, off-site improvements, for transportation, either bike paths, sidewalks, bus stops. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that can be, done off-site to improve the community and the livability of the community. And, it would always come back to this commission, obviously, before any site plan is approved, but they could get an additional density if they were to provide those types of incentives.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a little follow-up for Mr. Simmons' question. Concerning the 67-acre annexation over there in 510, I believe we designated that as commercial general, if I'm reading the map correctly.
Is that a question or a statement?
It was a question, actually.
Yes, sir.
I'm just
When it
looking
was
by the
annexed
color in
in,
commercial
it was,
general.
yes, when it was annexed in, that's what it
there's
is.
been talk about that area possibly being used ideally as a school site. That would be within our purview here to change that designation to institutional? Should we find...
No, sir.
Find that's an appropriate use?
No, sir.
Okay.
That is a private property, and if you take away their property rights, which would be commercial general, and down it into institutional, that is taking away people's personal property rights. Now, they may say, sure, that sounds great, but...
Well, you can still sell it, but you're telling me it's a lower value per acre.
That is absolutely correct, yes, sir.
All right, thank you. You answered my question.
Mr. Simmons, are you done?
That's it.
No further questions? Mr. Roth?
I have need for a little bit more explanation on page 8, the riverfront mixed use. We talked about the transfer development rights, and I understood that you can take a parcel of land and an adjacent parcel of land that's owned differently, and then move part of the rights from one area to get it out of a floodplain. Is that what's being presented here?
Yes, sir, that is an opportunity that we were presenting within this land use category. Because if you recall, when I first came on board, you were all very concerned about the small little riverfront lots on the east
Correct.
side of Indian River Drive.
And I am.
Right, and we completed the coastal resiliency plan. We identified, actually, everything east of US 1, I believe, is in the high hazard area, correct? And also identified that many of those small lots are actually attached to larger lots on the west side of the road, correct? Well, in order to encourage property owners without taking away their property rights, encourage them to not develop on the riverfront, but take those same development rights and move them across the road, or take those same development rights and move them to another piece of property that they may own or are, developing. Then we are encouraging the preservation of our flood zone, the preservation of our lagoon, but also preserving their property rights. That's kind of the beauty of transfer of development rights. Liberty Park, if you're familiar with the T&D that the county is proposing to put in right at 66 and 510, right at the base of the city. They were able to get increased density by doing just that. They purchased property throughout the county and put it into preservation, and then took those development rights and put them in our back door. So they were able to do that with TDRs. And so that's something that I believe the city could also utilize on a smaller scale, obviously, but to protect some of our flood zones and certainly our shoreline.
Who controls approval on that?
Oh,
A transfer right.
the city would. I mean, we would have to obviously go through our city attorney. And the Planning and Zoning Commission would be obviously approving that transfer, because you would see the development order, you would see the site plan with the increased densities.
Okay, that was a question I had, that there is a checkpoint on that.
Oh,
so that-
absolutely.
Okay. The other part of it that somewhat concerns me is you mentioned a transfer right to a remote parcel of property in another area of the city. And again, I guess before that could be approved, it would need to be, or granted, that would need to be approved by the site plan and further consideration by the Plan Commission or zoning.
Absolutely, sir. Yes.
And Mr. Roth, as part of this, there's a next step that goes along with this transfer of development rights program to where you're specifically identifying where those receiving areas can be, and then you set up the transfer mechanism within the land development code. So there is, like I said, a next step to create, I'll say, the legal mechanism for it. And then there's also the process that, and like Lisa was saying, it goes through the city attorney, it comes through the city as an ask and an approval, not as okay, I'm just going to hand you my TDRs and I'm done. There is a formal process, yes, sir.
Would there be any buy or cash option on that? In other words, to transfer it, would there be any cash required?
Depending on how the city wants to set up their program, you could do either, I'll say, a straight transfer of the rights, so one dwelling unit for one dwelling unit type of deal. What a lot of places will do is they will allow there to be a quote-unquote private market and a value to be established for that credit that's being transferred between, we'll say, you, Mr. Roth, and somebody else. But there again, some sort of legal mechanism that the city has to authorize and approve that just says, you're transferring your rights of X number to this property, and everything else is a private transaction. But at the end of the day, you've sold your rights off, or traded your rights off of that.
Okay, that makes sense, and it's something we can develop later. It's just a point in here, and I think it's a good idea because I am concerned about the riverfront area. I just don't want to have a pay in lieu of parking situation, because that's kind of developed into in my mind, an iffy situation, but another subject. I also had, let's see, a question on page 11. It's basically hinged kind of on the same thing, that utilization of transfer of development rights. So in other words, that's related to the subject we were just talking about,
yes,
correct?
sir.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, that answers that one.
Yeah, and if I could just help kind of clarify that, what we did was in those specific land use designations is to say, here's where we're already kind of thinking where the areas could be transferred to, but you still need to have this formal policy, which is, 1-1.5, and its related policy that sets out more of a framework. So yeah, we identified where these areas can be that you're transferring to, and here's kind of the initial process to start the discussion. Yes, sir.
Okay, I think it's a good idea because it opens up the door to future possibilities that just aren't available right now. Gives landowners some additional choices, which is good because we're trying to see that area grow and increase tourism in the area. So I think that's a very big plus. I also had a question, and maybe it's too general at this point, on page 14 about the objective on annexation studies. I read that and it wasn't specific, but just in my mind, is that just saying that there must be an annexation study? That's on page 14, 1-2.4.
Yeah, part of that is existing language. There's also, that was a recommendation that also came out, I believe, Lisa, from the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council as part of that other annexation that's ongoing. But, you know, there is the ability for the city to require one. We're not saying necessarily thou shall in this policy, but, you know, that one may be required, and if you are going to require one, then here's the things that the city needs to be looking at as part of one of those annexations.
That's right. It had a good long list of things to be incorporated under that heading. Just a general comment on page 16, the community appearance and urban design. I really, really love that paragraph, or that section, and I think it's really good, but my question is it actionable? And I guess we can get into that further as we develop other plans, but that's important to me. I see this idea of the fishing village concept, and for the rest of the commissioners, I'm not going to belabor it anymore. You've heard me before. But I think we need to do more in that area to give developers what we're really looking for. But I like that. So, and that's the statement. It's not really a question. I'm sorry. And that's it, Mr. Reyes.
All right.
I only had one question because most of them were asked. When you mentioned that through incentives we can possibly go, a developer can go from an 8-unit to a 10-unit on an acre lot. That's almost the same as the transfer of development rights. I'm a little uncomfortable with that. You know, maybe you get 30 landowners along the riverfront and they all transfer their rights into our neighborhood, and next thing you know we have a bunch of lots going up with 10 units on them. Although we probably don't have the space for it right now on the properties we have, but I see the only way to increase the land area is with the annexations and really start looking on how we want to develop that and break that up.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, because there's only 3 areas where you can transfer or increase the density, and that's the medium density residential as well as the mixed use areas.
Okay.
Which is the riverfront and the mixed use. So yeah, we wanted to make sure you couldn't take like the areas just I always want to say north of here, but west of here, that are I think they're actually low density residential, and start adding a lot more density in there. We're not advocating for that by any means. So that's the reason we were saying within these 3 targeted areas, and there again, it would still have to come back through the city as a formal process.
And then the other thing I was concerned about is increasing it by going up. I mean, we already had rules on how high we can build, especially along the waterfront. I guess eventually when you run out of land, you'll start looking at that. If we have to come up with space for people that want to move to our town, I mean, do we have to?
Are you asking about increasing the height limit?
Is this the only way we get funding for our city is through creating space for future?
Well, it's just about population growth. So if you run out of land and you run out of space, then you won't have population growth because no one will have a place to move to.
And I understand
so
that.
you'll be all right. But
I think a lot of us understand that.
Right, and if you're talking about height limits, that's the land development code. That is not the comp plan. So that's in the land development code, and that's not being proposed to be changed at this point.
Okay. I like Ms. Kottenberg's suggestion on the mobile home policies as maintenance, and I guess, like you mentioned, that would probably be in the property management paperwork. I don't think once we allow it, we can control it ourselves, can we? So, and yeah, they tend to get a little, although there are some pretty nice ones around here.
Thank you.
That's it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just to kind of with what you were saying with that, you know, you do have the purview under the comprehensive plan to add, you know, that something could be added into your land development code. So, you know, if it was the head nods and everybody basically agreeing that, you know, you wanted to add something under policy 124, where we're talking about mobile home residential development, or just a general policy overall regarding property maintenance standards within the city's land development code, or enhance those, then you definitely have that authority.
To do that now while we're doing the comprehensive
Yes, sir.
plan?
Yeah, now, we would not get into the specifics as far as the screening of the, removing the wheels, and if it gets rusty and things like that. That's a lot more detail, but you can set that policy in place now.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair.
With that, I don't think we have any other questions on land use element. If you want to go ahead and continue your presentation.
I was gonna...
Actually, should I be asking the public for any input on this? Zoom or however we're connected tonight?
It is up to you, Mr. Chair, if you want to do public
I definitely think, let's
input
go ahead. Do we have anybody on Zoom
per
tonight?
element.
Or here.
No, Betty has raised her hand. You might want to ask the public.
There you go. So we'll ask after every element, I guess? Sure. Okay. Would anybody in the public like to come up and speak in reference to the land use element? Please come up, state your name, and let us know how you feel.
Can we move the...
Very, very important. It's going to be around for the next 20 years. Okay. The high commercial use, okay, I think is an extremely bad idea for this area. Okay. We don't need that in this town. Okay. And the other thing is the land density, okay, should be no more, my thought, than 8. I think 8 is plenty, and I think the wording about giving a little bit of this property to get a higher density down the road on this is a terrible idea, okay? It's something to really consider to turn down. 8 units per acre is plenty, okay? I don't think we need any more than that, period. And the other thing is, protecting the water, okay, is extremely important, okay. Personally, okay, I think 4 units per acre is way plenty. And that's what we kind of got around here right now. To go to 8, okay, I think is too much. 10 is crazy. No matter how you word it, how you do it, okay? Keep away from 10. Please reject it any way you can, okay? And absolutely, we don't need any kind of high commercial. That's nuts for this town. Forget it. And if it was a vote on the city residents that live here, okay, I believe they would agree with me. Keep things like they are, folks. God bless you all. Thank you for doing a great job.
Thank you, sir, for your input. Anybody else from the public would like to come up and speak?
My name's Christopher Nunn, Sebastian, Florida. I have a question about the heavy industrial area. Where is his property located? Do we know?
We don't have heavy industrial right now.
No, but where is the gentleman that is applying for it? Where is his property located? Can I not ask that question? Because he's asking to have his property turned into heavy industrial, and that's why I was wondering where it was located. I know he's went through a lot. I was at the county commission meeting that decision was made, and it seemed like he had been through a very long process to get where he was. I'm assuming he's been working with staff for a long time. I'm not saying that we need to approve it, and maybe this wasn't the proper time to bring that up, but it is something we at least need to look at and have an adult discussion and look at and consider all of the methods of where his property is, where he's talking about making heavy industrial, and then at least having a discussion before we just say, no, we're not going to do it without all the information. Because if you don't know where the property is that he owns, then how would you know where you're going to put it? So you're saying no before you even know the answer. So I just encourage you to look at things on a whole before at least we come to an informed decision. Just a thought.
To answer you, Mr.
I
Nunn on
understand
that.
your question.
Yes, Mr.
No, I
Christina.
know. That's actually near the airport.
It's near the
property.
airport.
The only issue is there is some residential that's not that far.
Sure.
If you had a way of extracting all of the fluids.
Oh, no, I understand all of that.
Before they came onto the
definitely.
site, I think I'd be a lot more comfortable. I don't know if that's a possibility. I don't know if Louise
no
knows
argument
anything
at all
about
on
that.
That's irrelevant right now.
Yeah,
I mean,
we can't
he
go
has
there.
property rights, and he came to us, so
Yes, sir.
we've already voted on that.
Okay.
Thank you for your concerns. Anybody else from the public that would like to speak?
I was going to expound a little bit on what Chris said about that fellow. The only thing I feel bad about is that y'all don't want to add it into the planning and zoning thing. So you say no, and the city council said, hey, we need some more information on this, or delegation on that. Kind of ties their hands because they can't do anything because y'all have already said, we're not going to address it.
No.
So it's like a buck that's getting passed back and forth, so just that. But the other thing is like, I think your presentation is awesome, okay? But it would have been really nice to have it included for us so that we could follow along. I've downloaded the whole thing that's on the agenda for this evening, but it's not with the presentation. So I'm flipping all around trying to find the maps and what section you're in and everything. It would have been really nice to do that, and maybe that would help get more people to come to the meetings.
So we can
If they can kind of
note that.
follow along a little easier.
We'll make a note of maybe making the PowerPoints available to the public when they come to the meetings.
Because it's really fantastic. Thank you.
You can jot down your notes on it. Thank you.
My name is Bill Flynn. I live in Sebastian for a long time. I'd just like to let you all know, part of my job with St. Lucie County Schools is fluid management. And there are good practices, and it's regulated by both the state and the federal level of how those fluids are handled. And I'm sure any business that's within Sebastian would be following those regulations. I'm sure would be monitoring them. I just want to make sure that you were aware of that. As a community, we should be growing. We should be allowing people to create jobs for the local community, so they're not going outside. They're bringing tax dollars to our community. So that's just something you want to consider.
If I may ask you a question, you say you police fluids in St. Lucie County?
For the school system.
How often is the code violated?
It's heavily policed within the school system because we had a problem in the past.
That's in the
in
school
Port
board.
St. Lucie before the regulations were in, and they had ground contamination.
So there was an issue in the past?
It wasn't regulated back then.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
We have some Zoom members or viewers
We
that would
have
like
one.
to speak?
Yes. Graham?
Thank you. I'm assuming you can hear me from this. Sometimes
we
the
can.
sound on the computer isn't too good.
We can
We
hear
can hear
you.
you
fine.
Yes, you're fine.
Okay. 3 points. In the minutes of the June 28th meeting, I'd like to suggest a correction. That is, I suggest that you produce something the public can look at. It would be about 15 minutes. And it says in there 60 minutes. Now, God forbid that people would have to sit there for 60 minutes to watch PowerPoint just to summarize this plan. So if you can correct that to 15 minutes rather than 60 minutes, that would be good. The second point, the projected increase in population is 9,400 people in the next 20 years. Is that 9,600 people be accommodated within the existing city limits, or would that include annexations, for example, the Graves annexation, to put 9,400 people in there? And the next question I have is, it's a rhetorical kind of question, but I think you should consider it all the time. why do you want to grow 9,000, 10,000 people? And if you do, what's the benefit to this? If the benefit is going to be more residential, then believe me, residential costs more than commercial or industrial growth in this. So residential, that's not going to pay the city's bills. It's going to cost you more for residential development. So I just suggest that you keep asking the question, why you want to grow, where do you really want to put it? It's tough, it's a comprehensive plan issue, but it's a philosophical issue I think that the planning board should really think about. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Do we have any other Zoom viewers?
No, that is it.
Okay, I don't think we have any further questions or comments on land use element. We'll continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I promise the next element is not near as complex or time-consuming. It's probably not as much fun either, but what we want to do at this point is move to the housing element. This is definitely, like I said, it is a very important element for a community because we're talking about housing in general. We're talking about all forms of housing, whether it's home ownership, renter, we're talking about assisted living, we're talking about housing values, we're talking about affordable workforce, attainable housing, we're talking about all forms and functions of housing and how it supports the community. So as you're kind of looking through some of the elements, we're going to kind of do a little different because we're going to start with some of the data inventory and analysis components as well, and then start to move back into the goals, objectives, policies. So just to kind of give you a little bit of an overview there again, what we're talking about is all forms of housing within the city, everything. We're also talking about the city's affordable housing programs, and I will say that there are some mandatory components under Florida statutes that say thou shalt make sure you're accommodating certain populations, certain income levels, as well as abiding by affordable housing standards. It's not only a state, but it's also some federal standards that we're talking about, fair housing as well. All of those components are provided within this specific element. So as we all know, just kind of driving around, walking around, or riding our bikes, single-family detached makes up the vast majority of what we have in the city, about 87%. I was actually a little shocked when I saw the number being that high, because that is a very high number. The one thing that is kind of, this is actually a really good thing, this next statistic is, 80% owner-based dwellings. That says a lot about the stability of the community that you're living in and kind of working in. The other thing that you're starting to see is, a lot of the housing starts have been within the last, as bad as I'd say, since 1980 to 2009. Doesn't seem like that long ago for some of us, but yeah, that's 40 years ago. Things have changed a lot since that time, and actually been changing over the course of the last couple of years as it relates to building and standards. So we kind of worked through some of that and kind of looking at, what's going on from a median value as far as your housing prices are concerned. How many of those are occupied units or substandard? We also start looking at, what are some of the incomes that, and again, a lot of this information is coming from the Census Bureau. So we know that this information is going to get updated in the next 6 to 9 months, and this actually follows a little bit behind the national components with regards to population. An integral component of your housing element is also addressing historical structures. The Florida statutes say that, not only do you have to identify where your structures are, but also any historic districts. They want to make sure that you're identifying those in the comprehensive plan. Why? Because there are state plans and programs that go along with that. Based off of what information we have working with the city as well as the state, the Florida Department of State, as well as the historic resources, you have 82 structures that are currently documented as having historical significance within the city. That's actually a really good number. That says a lot about the community. Some of your compatriots or similar sized cities have about a fourth of this number. Now, so what that says is there's a lot of historical structures within the city. They've been maintained. They're still on the books as of this point. You do have 5 of those which are listed on the National Register of Historic Places, including your 2 historic districts. That's a big selling point, especially as we're starting to talk about historical resources and also just there again the stability of the city itself. Next, we want to kind of talk about affordable housing. Now, a lot of people will start to hear affordable housing, they automatically start thinking of Section 8, or they'll start talking about different things. But what we're talking about here is, housing affordability, and there's a lot of different definitions and applications, but what we go with are the definitions that are established by not only the state of Florida, but also the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which starts to get into how we're defining low income, very low income, and that starts to set the stage for your area median income and some of those housing prices and housing affordability. So all of that is kind of starting to get fleshed out as we're talking through this, and when we start seeing some of the policies, you'll understand what we're talking about and why. So what are kind of the big changes that we're talking about? We did notice that there were a lot of redundancies in the housing element as it was currently adopted. So what we said is, let's remove those redundancies. Let's say the same thing once, not say it 3 or 4 times. And let's also streamline it. You can say something with specific regard to the affordable housing, the low income, and those programs, and say it once and say it in one sentence versus the volumes that we had. So what we did is we tried to streamline. We retained the information because it is important and critical, but at the same time, just tried to make it a little bit more legible. We did start to add some aspects of this to not only the livable communities, and that is a trend that is, of course, occurring where we're looking at different aspects of a community itself, where we're looking at a diverse mix of housing. We're looking at accessory dwelling units. We're looking at different variations and options that can create an actual livable community within the city. The more options we have, the more ability that we have to provide housing for all of your residents, the better off we're going to be. And the one gentleman that was speaking when he called in, talking about the population growing by 9,400, there again, we think that's a conservative number. Those people are coming here regardless. Unless we put up a wall, or as Lisa said, unless we don't have any more room to develop or new houses, people are going to continue to come to this area for a couple of different reasons. One, it's cost effective. It's a great way of life. You've got a lot of different things going on between the beach, the lagoon, the natural environment. It's a natural draw to a lot of people. When you start looking at the number of people that are moving to the state of Florida every day, and we are seeing spikes in that, even with COVID, there's going to be the city of Sebastian's fair share of that. So we want to make sure we've got policies under your housing component that deal with the livability of these areas. The other thing that we added was a new policy, and this is actually getting back to energy efficiency and sustainability. And this was a movement at the state level a number of years ago that kind of came about after your last comprehensive plan. We're not talking about requiring everybody to have solar, but what we are saying is that energy efficiency is a key component, especially for all residents within the state of Florida. So, they're looking at certain things that have been implemented through the building code, but at the same time, we're talking about sustainable practices. We're talking about low impact development. We're talking about rain gardens. We're talking about, low flow fixtures. We're talking about materials that can be installed or constructed within houses at this point, so that we are reducing our carbon footprint. Now, I'm not saying that we're doing carbon sequestration or anything like that, but we're just trying to make things a little bit more efficient and better for the overall environment. Air quality, water quality, groundwater, all of that kind of comes back around, and similar to what we were talking about with the land use, and also similar to what you're going to be seeing in a couple of weeks with the coastal and the conservation components, and also with infrastructure. With respect to streamlining and reduction of, or reducing the redundancies, that's kind of like using the belt and suspenders approach there. What you can see is, this is just a quick example. We define adequate public facilities already in the comprehensive plan. Why do we need to talk about the requisite infrastructure, including water, surface water management, approved systems for wastewater disposal, solid waste collection and disposal? when it's already defined. And that way, it also gives us a little bit more flexibility in how we can define or add to public facilities, especially what are those facilities at a later date. We're not locked into a couple of very specific items. This gives us more flexibility to say what is important to the city. As it relates to livable cities, this kind of will give you an overarching list of, what are we talking about there? Again, a diverse mix of housing, implementation of innovative housing designs, accessory dwelling units. And we're not saying we're going to densify the entire city, but at the same time, the old mother-in-law or the granny flat is making a comeback, and there's a reason: affordability. And also for those of us who have aging parents that are still somewhat independent, but not necessarily, it's a perfect option for those types of things. Or where we have, in Lisa's case, adult children that are looking to maybe come back home, especially for whatever reason. This just gives those additional options as we're kind of talking through housing. Is consistent with the state. Sorry, better? My apologies. I start moving back away from the microphone without thinking about it. But implementing and recognizing the standards that have been adopted as part of the Florida Building Code, and also, as part of a national presence within Florida for, energy efficient structures. So what we're trying to say is making sure that there is that process and those policies in your comprehensive plan that recognize those. And with that, I'll answer any questions you may have with respect to housing.
We'll go in the same order. Mr. Hugan?
No questions.
No questions. Mr. Cristino?
All right, we spoke about this previously. You'll see it on page 11, household size, when I questioned your earlier numbers of 2.24. You got it? You'll see it, we're calculating 2.42 persons per owner. And that corresponds with other data I've read.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And that's the reason I said I've got that marked as my very first thing to double check. And actually using the orange pen on that one instead of the blue pen.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So we're missing a big percentage in there?
Well, it's 0.2%. If you do large-scale calculations, it'll show you that you need more houses than you actually do.
So the total is not 100%. Ms. Kaltenberg?
Yes, this is an area where I have a certain amount of expertise. Mm-hmm. I'm really disappointed that the roadmap is so inaccurate. I know that the figures were relying on the census and perhaps a projection, but I have to tell you that the use of the median price of a home in Sebastian is, there isn't even a home at that price available in Sebastian, period. It's certainly not the median. The median means 50% is above and 50% is below. That's completely inaccurate. I think you could get a lot more accurate figures by checking with the multiple listing services that are in the area, and I know they have the information there, but even the rental rates, the mortgage rates, they're all completely way off. So, and I guess just like I still, I use a map, it looks a lot like my phone now. It used to unfold. But I got to tell you, if the information on the map is wrong, you don't get where you're going. And I think that we don't have really good information here to work with. And although I'm so appreciative of the policies and the efforts that the city is making to move forward I really think we have to have more accurate information than we have to do so.
One of the things, if I could, Mr. Chairman, is, there is a requirement that we use, I'll say professionally accepted information. The MLS has not been recognized to the best of my knowledge. I'll go back and double check for those types of rates and things like that. So we're unfortunately beholden to either Bieber, Schimberg, or the census in this case. And unfortunately, like I said, this data is a little dated, as we all know. When you start looking at the American Community Survey from 2017.
And you guys realize that when you put this together? I mean, why move forward with bad data? I don't understand that.
It is the professional.
All you have.
It's what we have, and I will say, MLS is a great resource, Zillow is a great resource, but it's not professionally acceptable in our components. But one of the things that we'll go back and talk with Lisa about looking at and just confirming the data, as well as looking at Schimberg and some of the others that we've already looked at once before to see what is the difference at this point.
I just think it sounds ludicrous to say that we are required to use information that we know is wrong.
It's not wrong. I will say that. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry.
No, I don't want to get into a public debate back and forth.
That's fine.
It will be the same thing when we're talking about transportation. There are certain things that we have to identify and use with regards to whether it's the MPO's data, the Regional Planning Council. The data is accurate as of the date and information that we have provided.
Same thing with flood data is not good, but it's available to you to do your analysis. Ms. Kaltenberg, any other concerns?
No.
That's a lot of them that you put in there.
I thought that was a big concern.
It is.
And I'm not trying to push that aside. Like I said, what I promised to do is, like I said, come back and talk with Lisa and double check our sources and just make sure where we are on that.
Thank you.
Could we not perhaps have additional sources as opposed to the approved sources?
I mean, you can always add something, but there again, the MLS is going to be a snapshot as of right this moment.
I think everything is right now.
You can also get historic information that goes back 10 years.
Everything is a snapshot right now. Things are going to change drastically.
It just looks old.
Mr. Simmons.
I'll pass.
Mr. Roth?
Two points. On page 5, policy 3-1.2.1, affordable housing. And it goes on to discuss, at least in what I have here, the developer, encouraging the developer to ask and provide, or the city to provide technical assistance, housing data, and so forth. I'm just wondering, are they going to request information, or are they going to look at a piece of property and develop it to fit what the zoning code is and what will fit their particular financial situation? It may be one of those that's a nice idea, but I don't see how, unless there's another idea, how that can be really legislated. We're not a legislator. We just take the plans as submitted, and if it meets the code and meets the requirements for the property and setbacks, etc., how can we dictate something?
Yeah, I'm trying to.
I kind of understand what you're asking.
Yeah. I mean, this isn't saying that Lisa's going to go out and, every application that comes in, talk to them about affordable housing. And, there are affordable housing developers that have been knocking on the door, and they'll ask specific questions. And, it's Lisa's job per this policy and the cities to say, here's what the city has in the realm of, here's where the vacant land is, here's how the policies work, here's some programs that the city, sorry, I always move away from the microphone, that the city has in play at this point, whether it's assistance, grants, or even, expedited processes for qualified affordable housing programs. So, Lisa and staff become a repository of information that somebody can come and ask about.
Okay. Last question on page 6. The objective 3-1-4, or point 4.2, the ADUs, or accessory dwelling units. I'm a little bit concerned on that because people buy their property with the thought in mind that it is an R1 or a residential one, and how would we control that? In other words, if someone wants to come in and add something, because we've had accessory structures come in and we look at it and, oh, you have a full shower in that, in addition to a stool and a sink. Are you going to finish that out and rent it? And currently, those are questions we go through, and that's why I'm wondering, are we really protecting homeowners with having some language like that in there?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, Mr. Roth. And the thing that I would say is, this isn't saying that this is carte blanche going to happen in all areas of the city. This is saying that the city is going to identify those areas and/or those zoning districts where it may be appropriate for ADUs to be able to be constructed. There's nothing that says that an R1 neighborhood shall allow for ADUs. The city, through its analysis, may come back and say, no, we're only going to identify these specific zoning districts and/or these designations per the future land use map in concert with that, and say, these are the only areas where we're going to accept it.
So it would have to be a public hearing of sorts.
You'd have to identify that as a specific use within a specific zoning district, so you're talking about a text change to your land development code. Okay. So that is a public process, yes, sir.
So it's a suggestion, we consider it then. Okay.
Yeah, this is just saying you're going to look at it, you're going to identify. It doesn't say that thou shalt implement. This is saying you're going to at least take the next step and look.
And if I may, just for your consideration, accessory dwelling units have been recognized as part of this affordable housing solution to the affordable housing problem. But not only for that, but also the change in our family units. As Kelly was trying to express, your standard family has changed. So now you have adults living with their elderly parents. You have, single parents living, single parents with their children living now with their mom and dads, moving back home. You have older adults going to grad school, and now they want to come back home. Darn it. So these accessory dwelling units in applicable zoning areas, applicably zoned, become kind of a solution. Because though, Ms. Cottenberg, you're stating that the numbers may not be correct, if you use the MLS numbers, these numbers are going to show that we have a bigger problem.
Oh, yes.
Yes, we do. And so you need to not so much be focused on that, but on what are the solutions in your policies and objectives, if I may. And if that is put guidelines in there to allow this mix of families to be successful in our community and to create a more livable community because of that, I think that's kind of important. I shared with you all our consolidated plan that shows how many low-income individuals reside in our city, and you see where the median rents are, and it's difficult. And these are our service individuals, that provide our services. These are our retirees that are now living alone. These are our young individuals moving to our community. So that's what the housing element is about, to be able to afford a mix or to provide a mix of housing for everyone who lives in our community, and to be able to support them. And so that's my little, I'm sorry, soapbox.
Well, that's okay. I
That's
understand.
my little soapbox, sorry.
And I'm all for change, but
Yes.
I feel you also need to protect people.
Absolutely.
Who
Absolutely.
have a right. And as long as
Absolutely.
there's a methodology to it, and, you know, folks can have their say, and it's fine, and it works for the community, hey, I'm all for change, new ideas, because I hear what you're saying. I know that there are people in need, and, you know, they're bigger lots. I mean, we see that all the time, where people bought 2 lots, and they added a RV storage or garage or workshop or play area, that sort of a thing. So those things exist here. And so this might be another way to address the problem. I understand that, as long as we know there's a checkpoint, or so that it doesn't just get automatic. Thank you.
Very good questions. In reference to the accessory dwelling units, I could see those, and we're dealing with the vacation rentals by owners. And I could see every one of those turning into one of those. Although I would love to live in my shed. I would not have a problem with that.
Rent out the house.
Sustainability, energy efficient housing, LEED, green space, green products, a great idea. I brought it up in, I think it was one of the daycare areas that was doing an expansion, and I thought it would be great to harvest water and teach the kids there, you know, how to do stuff like that. We don't see enough of that. A few years back, it was big for everybody. Architects were all getting certified to do LEED projects, and not enough of that here. I think that should be pushed when people come to develop here. Sure, you want to mention that. What constitutes a historic structure? There's so many structures on here. I think my own structure is historic, but I'm just curious. I mean, I think I may know the answer, but how do you come up with that?
There's actually a definition through the State Department of Historic Resources, as well as the federal standards. And I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. There's different tiers, and there's certain qualifications. You know, baseline is, I think it's 50 years old. As the starting point, but that doesn't mean it's not like antique cars that as soon as it hits the certain age, you can throw the blue tag on it. There's other components as part of that.
So little by little, we're all going to have historic structures here pretty soon.
Yes, sir.
And would we get credits for that when we go out after block grants or something like that?
Quite possibly.
Okay.
If you're like one of my neighbors did when I was back up in Virginia, they put a big plaque up on their sign, the house that said on this site in 1872, absolutely nothing happened.
Right. One more thing. When you we were talking earlier about we have certain things in many areas in our policies, and you mentioned we could streamline it by saying it once. I think it gets hidden like that. Kind of like what Mr. Christina was bringing up with the wetlands. A lot of people know where to look for it, and now they don't really know, okay, now you got to go to coastal elements or something like that. So I don't have an issue with having it in many places. It's in your face right away. You don't even have to question it, or it may not get overlooked when reviewing something. So as far as streamlining it and saying it once, we're saying a lot of stuff in here that we don't need to say, so say it as many times as you want. I don't think we need to streamline it. And yes, definitely we need to confirm the data we're using for our analysis. Even in my job, I have to use old data many times, but as a standard of care, I take it upon myself sometimes to look at newer data that I know is out there and do my studies based on that. So I think it's very important that we start looking at it like that, although I feel that all the data is going to change drastically in the next year. With that, I have no further questions, other than, I will let you in 1 second. Okay, and on the housing element?
Yes,
Go ahead,
it is.
please.
It is. Question about the mini houses. I looked through this and I missed my comment on it. Is there any area in here where that would be covered? Talking about the mini houses, 400 to 600 square foot structures. Is that in here at all in the plan? I see a head shaking no. If not, why not?
No, we did not add that in. You know, quite frankly, we don't have that much land available to even support something like that, and you really need a higher density. We have had a lot of interest in doing tiny homes and doing tiny home developments in the city, but we don't support the density, and we don't have that many sites that would support that type of development. You know, and in addition, we have a minimum size of square footage of homes that would have to be revised and, changed in order to accommodate tiny homes. So, no, the answer is no, we didn't. If you'd like us to, we certainly can.
Yeah, and just to kind of,
Do you brush upon it on that policy?
Well, and I was going to say, Lisa's absolutely correct. We don't mention mini housing per name. It's one of those things that what's the name going to be in the next 3 years? So what we've done, we've kind of glossed over. We can beef it up. Is under policy 3-1.1.8, where it says changing conditions. I'm not going to say this is the get out of jail free card, but the city shall undertake special housing studies as deemed necessary to develop specific local strategies for addressing housing conditions, market trends, and housing-related challenges. So you could, under that policy as a governing body, say, we want to study tiny houses or whatever at that point.
Would it also fit under, on page 4, policy 3-1.1.3, housing options? I'm just concerned because I know we don't, well, I shouldn't say I know, I'm taking the advice that we don't have land right now to set up an area like that. But we're also talking about annexation in here, and if that be the case, we may have land available for that, and that is another way of meeting the lower income housing needs. So it might make it more versatile, and if you say it could be incorporated or brought in under that policy I just mentioned, housing options, I'm okay with that.
Okay. Duly
Yeah.
noted.
I just don't want to, at this point, just autocratically say, no, we didn't consider it, it's off the book.
Yeah, and if you look at the vacant land analysis, there is, areas that are out there residentially designated. Now, you may have to get a little creative, and I'm going to throw out a couple of options that other communities have done at this point. And I'm not saying we've incorporated this in here, but in order to help mitigate some of the housing affordability challenges or some of this, and I'll use Sarasota County as an example. They said if a unit is 750 square feet or less of habitable space, that's actual habitable space, not, the garage and things like that, it only counts as half of a dwelling unit with respect to density and with respect to impact fees. So that's one way that they're trying to accommodate more within specific areas. And they do set up, that you got to meet certain criteria in certain areas to meet that standard. The other thing is they also reduce the amount of required parking for those types of units. So that's one option that you could put into play.
Right. The other thing is, typically, you try to put it in a more urban area to avoid transportation, but we may annex something that's on a bus line, which would give them the transportation. We
Yes,
have a
sir.
good bus transportation system, so I'm all for keeping options open. And of course, it would take planning and someone a developer to come along with the idea and the right location.
They're out there. I will say that.
We just need to make sure it's right.
Yes,
That's
sir.
all. Thank you, Mr. Reyes.
The only other question I have is, did we skip over to transportation? Were you not presenting on all three of them?
No, we are, sir, but I asked your permission to do land use and housing first.
I'm sorry, I missed it.
That's okay.
That's fine.
So
we have one more to go over.
We do. Again,
you.
I'm leaving it open. We can continue. We don't have a problem, or we can
That's
continue
fine.
for
I think
next
we can
week.
wrap it
Whatever
up.
you all want to do.
Can we take a short recess?
I serve at your pleasure.
Get a glass of water.
Let's go for it.
Okay. Do you want to
Thank
do
you.
public now? Or?
I think all the commissioners would like to just go ahead and finish this, is that correct? Sure, the public's here, well, for it, let's do it.
You do have one person on Zoom
I'm sorry.
that has input.
So, I will, Mr. Cristino's reminding me of my job, and so are you, thank you very much. I'll open it up to the public right now for input on the housing elements. If anybody from the public would like to come up and speak, please come up to the microphone, state your name and your address, please. Thank you, Mr. Cristino.
Okay, I have a few questions. And like I said, I'm really new to this, so if I'm off base or if it's not where it belongs, just tell me it doesn't belong here, right? Is there anywhere in all this planning that addresses like the surface water issues where if item B is going to be built, is there something that has to happen first? Like does A have to happen before B happens? Is that kind of like if something's going to get built, oh, that's the first time someone couldn't hear me.
I hear you.
As a kid, they probably told you to be quiet more often.
Well, while they do
I was
that.
gonna say, we're pausing here for a moment.
Well, I believe you can hear me, right, Barb? Okay, it's just that we want to make sure we get public input and capture it. So just to answer your one question, I believe what you're asking is that if, this is land use, okay? And so we're at like the 10,000 foot level here. When we get down to development orders, which are your site plans and your permitting, that's when we're addressing, you got to do this, and then stormwater, you got to address your stormwater, you got to address your transportation, okay? That's one issue. But if you're asking, do any of these elements address stormwater? Absolutely. Stormwater is addressed in our infrastructure, and it's also addressed in our conservation and coastal management.
I'm thinking like if you put an apartment building here, because of all the concrete and everything, what's it gonna do to the lower lying houses here, so.
Correct, ma'am, and that's addressed during your land development codes and your development orders.
Okay.
And I'm a stickler with stormwater, so
Okay.
I always
You're
make
right.
sure the stormwater is covered.
We know that.
I agree, the housing prices are way low, but with affordable housing, what I'm I've only been here a little over a year, but my mother has lived here for like almost 25 years, so I've been coming 2-3 times a year my whole life. I get all the gossip and all the everything on what goes on here. And one of the things I'm starting to see is I'm starting to pay more attention, like many of us are, is that I keep hearing concerns about affordable housing. We need some more, but not too much. We don't want to get too many people. We don't want to, and I'm afraid we're starting to become a community where our workers cannot afford to live where they work. And it's sounding more and more like we're trying to become a community of the wealthy, supported by our outlying areas. So I just kind of want to make sure that that's not the way we're headed, that I'm hoping I'm misunderstanding that. And the third thing is when you're talking about accessory dwellings, keep in mind, we're also a retirement community, but instead of our older people moving back up north with their kids now, we're getting more and more kids that are moving down to the parents because they like this, okay? We might start to see more of those granny pods popping up. And I'm thinking that those are probably your accessory dwellings where the people have the property to put them on their property, so they don't need additional land use, but it may affect their zoning of their individual property or their land use of their individual property. So that's something that may want to be covered someplace. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Victor Young. I live here in Sebastian. I'm a native to Sebastian. She brought up some very good points, as so did Ms. Cottenberg, with the amount of what our prices are looking at. And I know that's no fault of y'all's, because you have to work off the data that you are required and allowed to work with. But we do have an issue with a income level of people who have a hard time finding housing as well, that are trying to live here in Sebastian. I know we have right over here behind the post office where we have the hotels that's affordable, are supposed to be affordable housing. But there's a problem like where you have two people that may work at Walmart, say for instance, that have a mid-level management job that is hard to afford the housing rental prices that we have, but they make too much money to live in an affordable place like that. What are we trying to do as a city to be able to get us back to where we can take care of that range as well? Or is there anything in play to take care of that yet?
Good question. I can't answer it for you.
Big struggle. It's a big struggle, and it's really important.
I mean, we got to figure out something, or try to even bring up some idea that we can bring some developers in that might be able to hit that base as well. I don't know what kind of incentives we can do there either.
Okay.
So just something to think about.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you. Well, I guess I have a question for Louise on that. You might know a little bit more. Is who sets those income limits? Is that a federal number, state numbers, for it to qualify for, say, affordable housing?
Mr. Klepper may be.
You know, what's that income level?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's, area median income.
Yeah.
So it's based off of your metropolitan statistical
Right.
area. So they're looking at what are those income rates for a broader area. And that's where part of the rub also comes in. And I'll be the first one to complain about that, because you may have a very affluent community just up the street within your same area that's skewing the numbers and saying, oh, well, affordable housing in this area is really $180,000 or $200,000 for that entry-level home, when really in your portion of the community it's like $100, $120.
All right, thank you. I'm just wondering how much control we would have locally over that. And
Very little.
Yeah, little to none,
Very
so.
little.
Anybody else here in the public that would like to come up and speak on the housing element? Anybody in the Zoom world that would like to speak?
Got one.
Thank you.
Graham, you're unmuted.
Graham Cox, 1213 George Street. Second set of comments here. I want to go back to the issue that was raised a few minutes ago about tiny houses and the comment that Kelly made. When you look at your carrying capacity maps and you look at how many
Hey, Graham, you gotta hold for a moment.
Sorry, say it again. Say it again, Barbara.
We can hear you now. Please proceed.
Okay. Let me go through it again. We're back to the question of how many people can you accommodate in the city. If you stay within existing city limits, there's about 1,192 acres that are vacant for residential. If you multiply that by 4 units per acre and multiply that by 2.4 people per household, you get to in excess of 11,000 people. So you have a city under existing land use designations can accommodate another 11,000 people when you're talking about 9,400 is the projection. You're right, it's probably a little low, but 11,500 fitted within the existing city limits is what I come up with as a back of the envelope estimate. Thank you.
So I believe what he's saying is that currently we can accommodate another 11,000 residents in our city.
And if you look back on the land use element under the build-out analysis that Kimley Horn provided to you, that is about correct.
Okay.
So that's residentially what can be accommodated in the city at this point. But that's, again, based on the density applied to this land use, which we all know is not necessarily correct once it's developed. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because you have your stormwater, you've got your buffers, you've got your, correct? So that 11,000 is based on a density of whatever is on the ground, not on the ground. Am I making that? On the map, not on the ground.
I don't know that you lose that much for single families. I mean, our stormwaters are developed already.
If you're looking at like the Highlands, yes, I hear you, but I'm talking about like a new subdivision.
Okay. Great comment, thank you.
May I go back to the missing middle? Because this is a big subject, and I know I brought this up to you all when we had our livability. What this gentleman's talking about is the missing middle housing. It is the housing that our people who clean our teeth, who you know, are integral to, essential, if you will, that word seems to be important these days, to our living. I mean, we all interact, we all support each other. They cannot afford to live in this city and across the country. This is not something that's isolated here in Sebastian. So when we talk about missing middle housing, that's when we're trying to get creative. And I know everybody gets very worried about increased density. I understand that. I do. But what you have to realize is that when the developers come in and they want to put in some type of relevant housing that the missing middle can move into, they have to do a pro forma on the cost of land, on the cost of development, on the cost of all of these other permitting, water, sewer, your transportation impact fees, which we don't get anything for, the stormwater fees, the permitting, everything. They have to put in a bag and shake it up and say, this is how much I'm going to have to sell this house for. And so when you are allowing incentives to allow them to increase their density, or you increase their ability to have smaller homes and more density on a site, that brings down the cost of the house that they're going to produce. Does that make sense to you? I mean, that's the reality,
I
folks.
understand that. I don't think you'll have to worry about Ms. Kottenberg really has
I know
commented on that many times. We're all getting older, and we're going to need people to care for us, and they can't afford to live here. So right now they have to come in from other neighborhoods. So I think we all understand that, and we look at it.
Thank you. Thank you for my soapbox. I appreciate it. I do.
Am I correct in saying that, Ms. Kottenberg?
Yes, and some of us will be harder to care for than others.
Yeah. I think that is it for the housing elements. We've got the public input and the virtual input, which is public. So I will continue with the transportation and mobility elements.
Okay. Yep, already got it up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And actually, I was looking at myself on the camera. I was like, I knew I was gray. I didn't realize I was that gray.
Are you making fun of me?
No, me.
I made you think of that, didn't I? We're gonna do this now.
Yeah, I've been wearing the mask way too long now. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize it was that. So with that, let's move into transportation and mobility. The first thing that you're going to notice is we've identified this beyond just transportation. It is about mobility, about all forms of transportation. It's not only about the vehicle, the car, but it's also about the bicycle, the pedestrian, those neighborhood electric vehicles, it's all forms of transportation. So what we're saying at this point is, this element really needs to be called what it is. It's about all forms of transportation and mobility. So hence the reason we went out on a limb and said this is what we're talking about. So what is the transportation and mobility element? Well, simply put, we're looking at the areas and especially the cities network. Roadways, sidewalks, trails, pathways, greenways, blueways, connectivity between and within neighborhoods. We're looking at all forms of that. We're looking at what we call the level of service standards that we have on different types of roads. And, a common misconception is level of service means how many cars can we get going at a certain speed down a certain road. It's actually much more complex than that. And actually, you're looking at a 1 mile segment and the number of cars plus the speeds and things like that. So, we're also identifying areas in concert with not only the county, but also the region through the Metropolitan Planning Organization as through what's called, Transportation Improvement Plan. There's kind of short and long-term views of what's being proposed, what needs to be proposed from a, not only just from a planning perspective, but also from a financially feasible perspective for our transportation network throughout the city and the region. So just to kind of give you the overarching, here's what we're talking about. Roadways are the easy thing to start with, and we identify based off of the roadway type, whether what we call a functional classification. An arterial, which are typically your 4-lane roads, your larger roads that can accommodate larger vehicle trips. Typically, those have limited driveway connections and roadway intersections. Collectors, those are those roads that kind of feed from our neighborhoods and get to the arterials. More driveways, more red lights and things like that. And then, of course, our local roads. Our local roads are those that serve, we'll say, the local traffic, the neighborhood traffic, and serve a very limited source of transportation and residents. Typically, you're not going to use a local road for all of your daily trips and travel to and from the area, the region, whatever else. You're going to use an entire system. The other thing is part of this analysis that we do, we also have to identify who's responsible for it, whether it is the state through Department of Transportation, Indian River County, or the city of Sebastian. And that starts to play an important role because there's certain things that each of these bring to the table and will say, yes, you can regulate certain things off of this street, or no, you cannot. And one of the common misconceptions that we always get hit with and have to kind of work through is, DOT roads and right-of-ways. The DOT permitting process is a separate process, but it's usually tied to your applications. Now, what a lot of people say is, well, we're going to say that you can't get your approval till you get an FDOT permit for that. When in reality, state law says you can't hold up a permit based off of another agency. So those two kind of run parallel, but they are interrelated. So that's one of those things when we start identifying who owns the roads, it's important to know who's going to be doing the permitting as well as the planning, the maintenance, and the enhancements. We also have to start looking at, this is actually a requirement of Florida statutes, that we have to look at transit within the community. They say, not only is it just where, where the transit is, but where are those levels of service? Where are the headways? Where are the stations? So, based off of the information we have, there are 5 transit routes crisscrossing the city, and they link to a larger system. And then the other thing the state statute said is, in addition to the roadways and the transit, you also have to identify where are your bike and pedestrian routes. They're not saying at that local level, but what are the major, I'll call them thoroughfares at that point, the regional greenway systems or the trails components. And we're looking at that through the planning period. We have a short-term and a long-term planning period. So what you're going to see throughout this element is a lot of information as it relates to roadways, but there's also quite a bit of information because we realize the importance of transit, because we know, just kind of like housing, not everybody has 2 cars. Not everybody has access to adequate transportation. Some people, even on days like today, love to get out and ride their bikes to go to Walmart or to the CVS or whatever else. And we need to make sure we're providing those safe, accessible routes to and from the neighborhoods to those commercial centers. So when we start talking about level of service, we do identify both in a map as well as in the text what level of service we're identifying. The one thing that I will say is that we have maintained or recommend maintaining your current level of service standard. And I know as soon as I say D, everybody has a tendency to go D. D's not good. You don't go far in school with a D. D is one of the accepted levels of service. That's still allowing for functioning traffic. You may have to sit through an occasional light or two, but it's still functioning. F is not where you want to be by any means. Now, the one thing that some places say, and we worked in these communities where they say, well, we don't like D, we want to be level of service C. Great. Build more roads, build more capacity into the system, provide those alternatives. So, there is a give and take between the existing levels of service that you see, as well as what enhancements do you want to do. And there again, we do that for all of the roadways minus, of course, the neighborhood or the local streets. The reason we put this map in here is because your transportation network, your mobility network, is inherently tied to what goes on at the greater level, and that being Indian River County. So, we start looking at what is in their long-range transportation plan, and this is something that the city and the county coordinate. There's a lot of different meetings that staff attend with the county and their counterparts, as well as through the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and also through DOT at this, I'll call it the regional district here. And they're identifying what roadways need to be identified for what improvements and enhancements in what schedule. So that starts to develop that capital improvements plan, so that schedule of when we're going to improve, what we're going to improve, and at what cost. All of that starts getting laid out at this level with the county's transportation plan, and that's an integral part to what the city's looking at from their long-range growth projections as well.
And I'm sorry, before you move off there, I just want to point out to the city that the county, some of their plans, in their tip there, is 6 laning of US 1 from Mobasso all the way down to 53rd. That's quite a big undertaking, 6 laning of US 1 south of our city. They are also proposing to 6 lane 512 from the edge of our city out to 95. Now, there may be a potential need if we are a vehicle-centered commuter type of community. But those types of improvements concern me as a planner who looks long-range and looks far out. So I just want to bring these type of changes to your attention so that you can be aware that these are plans outside of our purview, but that, our representatives can speak to their representatives about if we feel any kind of concern.
That up, the area where we're looking at the annexation, isn't that a future truck route going through there? Is that this 4 lane that you're looking at, or
Yes, sir. The widening of 510 has been needed for quite a long time, and I'm excited that they are finally getting funding to do that. They've been talking about that since 2004, and 510 is needed to be widened and improved for a very long time. And the county is moving forward now with improving their network of roads, their existing network of roads, north and south, 58th, 66th, and now they're going to be building 82nd. And 82nd, I believe they have identified as a truck route. Yes, sir. So that type of improvement to the roadways and the roadway network, I fully support. I just, you need to look at 441 through, is it Fort Lauderdale, I think?
Hollywood?
That's six lanes. Just look at a couple examples of 6 laning roads of US 1 and let me know what you think.
Those roads are supposed to get rid of the trucks coming through our neighborhood, correct? That 510 route.
Correct, and that's great.
Taking it out to US 1, and so that's going to eliminate traffic in our area.
That's right, and that's fantastic. Yes.
Okay.
That is, yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, Kelly.
No, you're fine. That's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because there again, we talked about earlier with the land use, what's going on right outside the city limits. from a land use perspective. Same thing happens as it relates to transportation. So that's where it's critical that the city and the county are maintaining the relationships and the interlocal agreements that they have, and that they're talking, so that, the city has a seat at the table when these improvements are being proposed and why. Because the last thing you want to do is throw a 6-lane, we'll say, going from 95 to the city limits, and it drops into a 2-lane. That doesn't create for a good situation. So that's where the coordination has to come about, and that's part of the reason why we identify not only the transportation and mobility element, but also under the governance element, all of those components that are being done as part of an interlocal agreement.
And the next slides really are just to educate you that the North County Greenways Plan was completed in 2008, that again identified different greenway paths and trails, and it's incumbent upon us to be sitting at the table, the MPO table, and we do, and make sure that some of these plans come to fruition, become part of the county's funded projects. And funding is limited and stretched thin all over the place, so it's not like, they're holding back on us. I'm just saying that it's incumbent upon us to know that these plans are in existence, to work with them on these plans. Kelly, if you keep going, I also have documents from the bicycle prioritization plan and the pedestrian I can't even say the word, prioritization plan that the county completed in 2015. So these plans are there. They identify, what was identified as a need in our city, and throughout the whole county, obviously. But so it's important that we're aware of these plans and that we push for the needs to be addressed.
So what were some? Yes, sir.
I'm looking for the Blue Ways.
The Blue Ways? The Blue Ways is in the north.
Back in '06, I brought this up. We need some water taxis across to the inlet, You mentioned Blue Ways. It's been in our vision in the past. What are we doing with Blue Ways? Nothing?
No.
Not much.
Not good.
Yeah.
And Irons.
I'm gonna start my own Blue Ways. Thank you.
To go along with your historic house, correct?
Yeah.
So that ties in with our marked walking trails in the city and
some submerged land leases, some little waterfront businesses there along the river. We kind of shied away from some stuff out there. Thank you.
So similar to what we've done in the other elements, what we did is to kind of identify where were some of those key additions to this specific element versus what you had previously. And I will say that, when our transportation engineer, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, we work hand in hand with him. He's not only looking at the city's growth and development patterns, but we're also looking at the regional models and starting to plug in some of these trends to make sure, what's going on and to ensure that what's being proposed is actually what needs to be done. So part of the discussion that we have here is adding some additional policies that, I'll say, provide some additional teeth for the city as it relates to your transportation and mobility enhancements. It's not only just about the roadway improvements, but it's about all forms of travel. So we talk about prioritizing, we talk about connections, and we'll go there again, we'll go through these. We are talking about parking, and some of you may already start to go, well, parking, what? Why? And we'll talk about that in just a second. Environmental impact, safety, design, and traffic calming. Now, the one thing that we did not put up on here was, there's also a portion of your transportation mobility that deals with your airport. The recognition that, the state as well as the region benefit from what goes on at that airport. And so, part of the task that we have to do under the Florida statutes is also to make sure that you have consistent policies that protect and enhance the airport, but also provide for protections against incompatible land uses within certain areas around the airport. So those policies and those objectives that you see in 2-1.8 are dealing with your aviation components. The other aspects that we've added, but we didn't note on here, of course, are dealing with wayfinding. And you may go, wayfinding, what? Wayfinding it's a signage system. It's an identification and information that people can use to get from point A to point B to point C. It's not only a means to get to an end, but it's also a way to help identify portions of the community, to identify those key aspects that you really want to highlight and showcase, and by what means and methods you can use to get there. So what are the specific policies? Well, we added a prioritization policy saying that, where adequate facilities exist, we're going to be looking at all modes of transportation, not just the car from this point forward. People and bikes are just as important, so we need to make sure we're enhancing and incorporating those types of policies. And that's also something that the Florida Department of Transportation has been pushing for the last number of years as well. So the thing that we're doing is identifying what is some sort of hierarchy for improvements that the city will utilize in looking at some of their improvements. Is it a sidewalk first versus a bike lane versus a multi-use trail versus what? So we're providing the city with some criteria to help with their decision-making process. Connections. This is critical because we're talking about making those connections not only between and within uses, we'll say like between these two buildings, but also between neighborhoods and parks or schools or commercial centers and other areas, so that you don't have to get out on the main street every time that you're coming in and off a property. Providing those alternative means for connection. And a bike ped, what we call those neighborhood electric vehicles, golf carts or whatever, or in the case of a gentleman that lives in my area, he gets out on his hover-around and he rides through the McDonald's drive-through twice a day. It's an alternative form of transportation, and we need to make sure we're accommodating for those. Parking. You may start to go, okay, why are we dealing with parking? Because, we're going to have autonomous vehicles in the next 10 years. We're not going to need parking. Well, I would say that you're still going to have parking needs. You're still going to have the desire to want to get in your vehicle and drive. But one of the things that we also started to look at, and we did take a quick look a little bit further ahead, is looking at the city's land development code with respect to parking. It definitely needs to be updated. You have older, outdated standards. You've got components or references to uses that really aren't even in use anymore. The ratios and the rates are about, we'll say, several generations back. Lisa, apologize.
That wasn't here.
Yeah. So what we're saying is we're putting in motion that the city needs to reevaluate their current parking standards. Now, we're not saying you don't have to change anything, but you need to take a look at it, because what you have is really 1980s, 1990s. And there's a lot of different things that have been occurring in the realm of parking in the last 5 years that you need to be taking advantage of. Environmental impact. So, knowing that the level of environmental concerns and considerations in this community, we wanted to make sure that there was a policy within the transportation and mobility that those aspects of the environment are being considered with all of our transportation and improvement plans. Why? Because ultimately there's going to be some form of an impact. So we want to make sure that the city has the tools in place to be able to assess that. And that'll also help with your prioritization and the hierarchy of what improvements get done when and where. Safety objectives. This is an overarching concern of every community. How can we better work to reduce crashes and those conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians, or vehicles and vehicles, or vehicles and whatever? So there's a policy that we, of course, added here looking at are there methods that the city can undertake to improve those areas, and taking a look at the data that they have and or the state or even the county, where are those high-risk intersections? What can be done to improve the accessibility and the movement in those areas for all forms? So just providing that as an additional tool for the city to move forward with. Design policy, roadway standards. Right now, your current standards don't necessarily meet DOT standards, so what we're saying is let's make sure that we're in compliance with DOT when it comes to certain types of roads. Also looking at the complete streets components. That is an actual, there's a formal document, a series of documents that the Department of Transportation has adopted over the past couple of years to provide as a model for communities moving forward. So that we're just advocating that, you know, as you're moving forward with new roadway designs, that you're looking at and implementing those standards. Traffic calming, that kind of goes back to the last policy we're talking about. You know, and you should consider creating a traffic calming manual. We're not saying traffic calming shall be done in every street and every neighborhood, but at least identify either through a complete streets component or a traffic calming portion of that. You know, what types of traffic calming mechanisms will the city support? You know, the easy thing a lot of people go is just throw a speed bump down. Oh, those are horrible. But if you can create what we call bulb outs at intersections where you actually reduce the width of the street, or what we call the mid-block crossings where we create these middle bumps, or even through landscaping, just some of those visual cues that will cause a driver to slow down on a street. Doesn't always have to be a physical construction. Even it can be, you know, as simple as the flashing signs that says, you know, flashes up, here's your speed. But, you know, anything that you can do as part of a manual to identify what the city would consider from a traffic calming perspective and what areas those could be applied in.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe many of our residential streets already are where they're not built to full capacity, and it's tight, so it calms you down when you see another vehicle coming by. So in my neighborhood, I know it's like that, and many others. You cannot speed through 2 cars at a time without going into the swale. I think we have that already in many of our areas. Thank you.
Another consideration with narrowing existing roads in this day and age is the advent of distracted drivers. And you got a bicyclist on that road, and all of a sudden it gets narrow, and they're texting their friend, and the bicyclist is hummus.
And that's the reason primarily that we're talking about those alternative modes with the multi-use trails, and I'll say the segregated or separated bike lanes. You know, a 3-foot bike lane on a local street that's not good.
We'd like to look at widening the existing, any new roads built in the city that accommodate people that like to walk. I believe we had sidewalks on both sides of the road mandated.
Or like none
I
in
know
my
you have
neighborhood.
none. We know that Louise has none.
Yeah, but see, I think we use the streets as our sidewalks there, especially in the residential areas. Very common.
And Mr. Chairman, that's exactly why we were talking about the hierarchy and looking at those as far as what improvements, you know, looking at pedestrian or bicycle kind of in that top tier.
Roads, it's all through here, bicycle friendly. Well, most municipalities have bike lanes.
Not necessarily, but yeah, I mean, what we're starting to see more and more, thankfully, especially with the FDOT, is the wider than the 3-foot, or they'll provide the 2-foot buffer plus the 5-foot additional bike lane, or they'll do a segregated, we'll say bike multi-use trail, which is 10 to 12 feet, that accommodates bicyclists as well as pedestrians off of the street at that point.
Yeah, the number I had received from our city manager here was 4 feet was the total width necessary for the bike lane, including striping. Is that incorrect?
No, that's correct.
It's correct.
That's from Paul Carlisle. I discussed it with him, so.
That is correct, and like I said, there again, there's nothing that says that you can't do a standard that is 5 feet or 4 feet or 3 feet, especially if you've got a constrained roadway. There again, it all becomes down to being part of a context-sensitive solution, and it kind of goes back to the one size does not fit all. You know, if you've got an area where there's high pedestrianism and you're using the street as your sidewalk, you know, you're probably not going to have a dedicated bike lane along that road. You're going to try to look at something else at that point, along with a pedestrian sidewalk that is not right up against the edge of the road.
And also,
how do you do the analysis on the pedestrians? I know you do the traffic trips for the vehicles that come through an area. Where do you get your pedestrian data from? How do you know how many pedestrians there are?
You have to actually put out a counter. I'm not even kidding, because I've had to do this.
No, so that's fine. So we don't know that there is streets that are having problems right now.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to the citizen, I'm not going to say citizen complaints, but the citizen input.
Citizen, okay.
So that, you know, in your case, let's say that, you know, you've got a roadway that's 24 feet which is 2 lanes of traffic, and that's pretty typical, but you also have people walking in the street, then automatically you start to think as a city, yeah, that's not sufficient.
Right,
So you start looking at what's that right-of-way, is it a 30-foot right-of-way, a 40 or 50-foot right-of-way? And then what can you start to implement in those areas?
So we will be looking at pedestrian incidents with traffic or complaints. So, okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of data, especially as it relates, the city, crash data. They record if it's pedestrian or bicycle versus whatever at that point. Same thing with the county, same thing with DOT.
And I would encourage you to look at the county's bike and pedestrian master plan from 2015 that is on the MPO website. They do look at that crash data. They did look at that crash data.
Thank you.
One further comment. I think we need to give some consideration sidewalks or some type of control in our planned unit development. I live in one, and it's a constant battle on 15 miles an hour, and we've had a lot of near misses, but they're not going to do it. So it should be in the plan that is approved, because if it's not there, they won't put it in. They need to have that as a financial component to figure out when they're building it. Some type of either sidewalk or walking trail or something adjacent to the road.
You're correct. And
otherwise, there's roads and that's it.
New development.
People, bicycles, golf carts, all on the same road.
I'm sorry, Mr.
And no white lines down the middle or on the side.
Yeah, I mean...
enough said. I'm sorry.
I don't know if he's familiar with our road widths are at 22 feet. So our roads are already strained. I look at a lot of people, I have a boat. I get that boat and I go to trailer it up to the ramp. It's an experience with other cars, trucks coming the other way. So our roadways, we definitely have to give consideration to widening these roads.
Yeah, I live in...
They're going to go fast.
They do. They go like bats.
We don't want them to go fast.
I lived in a community that allowed 18-foot wide roadways, two-way traffic.
I do too.
So.
Yeah, now we've just got to give this some consideration so that there's enough room for everybody to get around. I brought it up at the last meeting. We got landscapers all over the place with trailers. You know, you're trying to get around them. If they don't pull over all the way, et cetera, et cetera. It could be a fiasco at times.
Yeah.
And the roads just are very narrow here to begin with, so it just makes for a difficult day.
And Mr. Casino,
We've kind of morphed into
people should
talking
be able
here
to get
about
around
sidewalks.
safely. Pedestrians.
Excuse me, we've kind of morphed into talking about sidewalks, and I noticed that that it does state that new developments will have sidewalks, and that's great. But there is nothing in here about upgrading existing neighborhoods that don't have any sidewalks. I think it's a goal that we ought to be looking at. Also, there's a statement here that says that it's quite ludicrous that the city has a good bicycle pedestrian plan. Where is it? We don't. We have a couple of streets that have sidewalks. They tend to be main arterial streets. They tend to have sidewalks on one side of the street and not the other. You could, for instance, from my neighborhood, I can't get anywhere safely on foot or on a bicycle. When I'm going home tonight, I'll be lucky if I don't run over that lady with her 2 dogs, because she walks her dogs in the streets. There are no sidewalks. And I'm aware that she's there, but not everybody's aware that she's there. I really think we're not doing very well with that. We also have that goofball sidewalk that runs down 512, which is not a safe place to walk, because if you fall, no one will ever find you, unless it's that weird guy who hides in the trees there. He will find you. I would never walk down there. I would never send a child down there. And my sister did fall on that sidewalk, and I felt really bad for her. She broke her glasses, hit her knees. It was a terrible thing. She was very embarrassed, and she had to get home all bloody and scarred up. But I think that we're stating that we have a relatively comprehensive sidewalk throughout the city, and that's not true. We don't. And we don't have any plan for the missing areas. Pardon me?
Where is that at? Can you point me to it?
It's on page 18.
18, thank you, ma'am.
Under pedestrian system. I wouldn't call what we have a comprehensive plan. I'd say 90% of the city is not served by sidewalk.
I know our neighborhood isn't.
No.
And I'm a new neighborhood.
And you've got even skinnier streets than in my neighborhood.
Right. And our neighborhood was 2006.
I actually consider that other sidewalk safer than the one on the other side. It has less driveways coming into it. I almost got hit by a car coming out of one of them driveways in one of the storage areas on a bike. So I would go on the one path that you don't like. So.
Oh, it's not that I don't like the path. I don't like the fact that it's
a safer
it has
path,
no visibility.
Just, a brief synopsis. I mean, as we developed as a city many years ago, and we moved westward, it was deemed too expensive to continue the sewer systems. Now we got a ton of houses without sewers out there, and now we go, that's a huge mistake. It's going to cost us millions and millions of dollars to correct that mistake. So I think the point we're trying to get across, if we're going to build anything new, let's invest in the infrastructure now, instead of going back and going, God, this looks like general development did it. Let's do this with some foresight. Let's make roads wide enough with sidewalks, with bike paths. It shouldn't be an argument. And let's have a city of the future here.
I think the site plans we've reviewed Was that me? We go and add sidewalks everywhere. It's almost like we started doing it, just like the stormwater, we're gonna waste a ton of money. Oh. Anyhow, any other commissioner comments on this? I'll open it to the public for any comments on transportation and mobility elements.
I want to thank y'all for going outside of the Sebastian area and looking at the surrounding areas when you incorporate your plan. You brought up something good about 82nd Avenue being connected to 510. It is crucial that when they do that we think about that. There are two quarries between 69th and 60 that get a lot of dump truck traffic that are, they connect that over to us, that's going to allow them to come this way. We're going to start seeing more dump trucks on 512. If they're widening it to 6 lanes from our city border out to 95, that makes sense if they're going to be doing that. We may want to look to even try to bring that all the way up to 510 even. I had one other point, and now I got to remember what it was.
Well, that's a major point. Thank you.
Parking lots they brought up. We already have a beautiful parking lot that everybody just did over by the park for boats, which is great. But the problem is, with our population that we have right now, it's already overflowing. And if we're looking at within the next 10 years or 20-year plan, I think this is, of another 10,000 people possibly coming, where are these people going to be able to park their boats? I mean, this is a very big boating community already, and that's going to become an issue as well. I know we have more parking lot over by the splash pad, but it's not really set up for people to be able to bring their boats in there that well. So just another thought that we can look at.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Christopher Nunn Sebastian. As far as sidewalks, I don't know who makes decisions for sidewalks, but the one sidewalk Ms. Cottenberg is talking about on 512, I would love to see them take that entire, they've started cutting the bushes down from here so you can actually see through, so it doesn't feel so dangerous. And then I think the idea was to give privacy for people walking and biking. I would love to see them take that whole row of trees down, widen that, and make it more of a bike path and walking path. I think it would serve the community better, plus be safer for people. I think most people are scared to walk on that path because they feel like nobody can see they're there. And so I agree completely. I would love to see more sidewalks in our communities. I know my son tries to ride his bike to the store up to Cumberland Farms, and it's a challenge to find a sidewalk to stay on, and he talks about cars almost hitting him all the time. So if that's something we can do as a backwards achievement, going back to our communities and adding sidewalks, I think that would be a great thing to add to our plan. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think that area out there is county maintained. It is overgrown. I think if it was a little better maintained, you may see the people on the sidewalk. The evergreens are very nice, but they're pretty thick right now. And the grass below it is coming up to where it doesn't get maintained enough. Neither does the stormwater right immediately next to it. That what I call a canal is not a swale. It's almost like a canal. It's usually overgrown.
I just want to toss out a
Thank you very much for your comments.
I want to toss out a compliment to the city. We have an excellent city engineer now, and he's doing a really good job of evaluating sidewalks in addition to traffic control, and I've seen what he's done, and I want to give him a big compliment tonight. So I think we're in good hands in that area.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. Would our Zoom member would like to comment? Any input?
No.
Okay. Oh my God, I lost my agenda.
Mr. Chairman, may I just again make the announcement that this is not the only time the public needs to comment on these elements. Community Development Department is open 5 days a week, 8 to 4:30. You can email us, you can call us, you can send us notes by carrier pigeon. We welcome everyone's comments. Please review the elements. We'll make sure the strike-throughs and the PowerPoints are loaded up from now on. Our next meeting will be August 20th with the Coastal Coastal Management, and Parks, Rec, and Open Space. So we look forward to it very much. Thank you so much, Commissioners. We truly appreciate your time and energy.
Thank you very much for your presentation, sir. Okay, we'll close that. At this time, Commissioner Manners? Hearing none?
I do have one, and
Come on.
I'm reading this, and I'm befuddled by all of the acronyms in here, and I read something, and then I understand it, and I go 3 pages back, and I thought, what was that? So I have to go back and find it. If there's any way we could put some kind of a cross-reference list for us, that would be excellent. I would appreciate it, but I don't know how much trouble that would take.
Mr. Chairman, we're actually finalizing the list of acronyms as a separate pull-out section for everybody, because we do realize, like I said, we speak in a lot of acronyms.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but yes, we are creating an entire section just of all the acronyms.
To the layman. Thank
Yes.
you. Good comment, Mr. Roth.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a general comment, and I know it's addressed earlier with Ms. Cottenberg, but I think it was kind of answered in a condescending way about the statistics and the data that's being used, especially in the housing. I mean, we all know what data is all about. I mean, we look at the clock right now, it says 9:03. Is it in the morning or is it night? I look outside and I see it's dark and I know it's at night. But when I'm seeing a median price of a house of $157,000 here in Sebastian, that's crazy. If there was houses like that were available, I'd be out buying some. That means half of them are more expensive than that, and then half of them are lower than that. And I would beg you to look in a classified ad or realtors and see if there's a house even for $157,000 in the area that's for sale right now. So I think we're having to make decisions and base things on not real data. I know you tell us that that's what's available to us and things like that, but, you know, I like to think that we deal in the real world as well. And I don't think those are real statistics, to be honest with you. They're not accurate anyway. You know, just a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. City Attorney matters.
$279 for affordable.
Huh?
Staff matters?
$279 for an affordable.
Yeah.
None? Okay, we can adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Wait right here is all she said to me, and so right here I stay. Time has reached our home, and I've been left alone. It's carried her away. Everyone keeps saying nothing helps but time. Time is all I own. And time won't stop replaying over in my mind. I watch the hours